Good evening and welcome back. Okay, let's try that again. Good evening and welcome back. The time is now 4 o'clock and I would like to call the July 17th through 19th, 2023 meeting of the Energy Facility Siting Council back to order. Mr. Secretary, please call the roll.
Marcy Grail,
Present.
Kent Howe,
Here.
Jordan Truitt, Cindy Condon,
Here.
Ann Byer, Richard Devlin. Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary, are there any agenda modifications?
Madam Chair, there are no agenda modifications at this time.
Thank you. I have the following announcements. For tonight's public hearing, there are 3 ways to let us know you are interested in providing comments to the council. For those in person, please fill out a registration card, which is available on the table, and submit to Sarah Esterson. For those using the WebEx, you will need to use the raise your hand feature. For those on the phone only, you will need to press *3, which will alert us that you want to speak. We will go over these again during the public hearing. For council members and anyone addressing the council, please remember to state your name clearly and please do not use the speakerphone feature as it will create feedback. Please mute your phones, and if you are joining us by phone and receive a phone call, please hang up from this call and dial back in after finishing your other call. For those signed onto the webinar, please do not broadcast your webcam. If you want to receive future email notifications of council meetings, project milestones, or rulemakings through our Click Dimensions program, you can do so by clicking on the link in the agenda or on the council webpage. Look for the green box on the right-hand side of the page that says sign up for emails updates. You may also sign up today on the computer near the entrance to the room. You are also welcome to access the online project mapping tool and any documents by visiting our website. Please note that the audio and video of this meeting is being recorded and may be posted to the council's website following the meeting. Energy Facility Siting Council meetings shall be conducted in a respectful and courteous manner where everyone is allowed to state their positions at the appropriate times consistent with council rules and procedures. Willful, accusatory, offensive, insulting, threatening, insolent, or slanderous comments which disrupt the council meeting are not acceptable. Pursuant to Oregon Administrative Rule 345-011-0080, any person who engages in unacceptable conduct which disrupts the meeting may be expelled. Our first agenda item this evening is approval of the June 1st and June 23rd meeting minutes. Has everyone had an opportunity to review the minutes? Any questions, comments on the minutes?
Madam Chair, I move that the council approve the minutes of the June 1st, 2023 meeting and the June 23rd, 2023 meeting as presented and recommended by staff.
Thank you, Vice Chair Howe. Do we have a second? Oh,
Madam Chair, this is Councillor Byer. I would second the motion.
thank you, Councilor Byer. With no further questions or comments, Mr. Secretary, please call the roll.
Kent Howe, Ann Byer, Richard Devlin, Jordan Truitt, Cindy Condon,
Yes.
Marcy Grail. Motion carries, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Next, we have the Council Secretary report, Mr. Cornett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, I'll start with some staffing and council updates. Councilmember Truitt's term ends on September 22nd of this year. He's indicated that he will not be seeking a second term, so we are actively looking for his replacement right now. Liz Boba, who is our compliance officer, second compliance officer, is no longer with the Department of Energy. So we are looking to refill her position. Next, I'm going to move on to project updates. The first is the Muddy Creek Solar Project. So the project is a 199 megawatt solar and battery storage project proposed on 1,588 acres or 2.5 square miles in Lynn County, approximately 8 miles south of Brownsville and immediately east of Interstate 5. We will be holding a public information meeting on the project at the Brownsville City Hall on Tuesday, July 25th, so a week from today. It'll start at 5 p.m. From 5 to 6, we'll hold one-on-one conversations and questions with people. We'll have formal presentations by the department and the applicant at 6 p.m. And then at the conclusion of that, we'll take questions and comments from members of the audience. If any council member would like to participate either in person or virtually, you're absolutely encouraged to do that. Please let me know so that if we have 4 or more, that constitutes a quorum and is technically a council meeting. So, if up to 3 of you want to participate, it's not a problem. If 4 do, that could constitute a meeting, and not that it means that you shouldn't do that, it just means we have to provide notification and minutes and those types of things.
May I, this is, if anyone's planning to go to be forward, since they were.
I'm hoping to, I have a 5:30 meeting that we'll get over at 6:30, and then I've got to drive there, so it'd be 7.
I think that would be about the end of the meeting.
Be too late.
Yeah, I think that would just probably be about you'd miss
Yeah.
pretty much everything, I think, at that point.
Okay, so I won't be there.
So we have 2, which,
I can, but I don't want to collect somebody. I don't want to have to.
If it's not going to be a problem, I probably can do it, but I'll check in with you.
okay. Yeah, I mean, at this point, there's 3, so that's not a quorum, so it'd be fine.
Okay.
Next on my list is the Sunstone preliminary application for site certificate. We are close to receiving that, not quite yet. We've received the application. We're still working on getting the fee for that, so we don't have it formally submitted yet. This was formerly known as the Echo Solar Project. The project location is just southeast of the corner of the Boardman Bombing Range in Morrill County. And this would be, I don't have the megawatts in front of me, but on 10,900 acres or 17 square miles. So it's a pretty big acreage solar project. Next on my list is that on June 20th, we received the Boardman to Hemingway request for amendment number 2. So I know we're still in the process of Boardman to Hemingway amendment number 1, but we received their amendment number 2 already, and we sent out notice of that on July 13th, and I know that was also sent to council. Next on my list is the Obsidian Solar Center amendment number 1. So we are close to finishing the draft proposed order. We're still waiting for some information from the applicant or the certificate holder to determine that the application, the request for amendment, is complete. But assuming that all goes to plan, then we will issue the draft proposed order shortly, and we would hold the public hearing on the draft proposed order in Christmas Valley on August 24th. So it would be the next council meeting. That would be Thursday evening. We would return to Lapine, stay the night there, and then the next day, probably late morning, have the regular council meeting. So that's currently what we're planning, but we'll certainly be in contact with council members to confirm that. Next is the Northwest Naturals mist pipeline. So on May 2nd, 20 of this year, the department received an amendment determination request from Northwest Natural. They requested a determination of whether the installation of a section of the existing Flora well pipeline adjacent to the main line road of the facility within areas approved in the existing approved site certificate would require an amendment. So the site consists of underground natural gas storage reservoirs, compressor stations, gathering pipelines, operations and maintenance facilities, and gas transmission pipeline. So you have the jurisdiction over that it's called above ground, but a lot of it is actually below ground. The difference is that the Department of Geology and Mineral Industries have jurisdiction over the wells themselves. So we have jurisdiction over parts of it, Dogami. So um, so this is the portion of the facility that you have jurisdiction over. The issue here is they found one pipeline crossing and touching another pipeline, which is not, basically it's a safety hazard. So they need to change the location of the pipeline to remove that hazard. So on July 14th, the department determined that an amendment was not required based upon a specific rule provision. So this is OAR 345-027-0353 sub 2, which states that an amendment is not required for a proposed change to the number or location of pipelines for a surface facility related to an underground gas storage reservoir that would not result in the facility exceeding permitted daily throughput or a change to the site boundary. So the specific carve-out language in the rule kind of related to not necessarily this circumstances, but more broadly kind of pipeline circumstances, and this does not trigger an amendment. So we did our determination per OAR 345-027-0357 sub 6 that requires that at the request of a council member, the department's determination must be referred to council for concurrence, modification, or rejection. So if you would be comfortable with this, I know we sent our determination. Our determination, you simply have to let us know and we will put it on the agenda for the next council meeting. Okay, a few compliance updates. So next one, Bigelow Canyon Wind Farm. This is a 450 megawatt facility in Sherman County. Portland General Electric is the certificate holder. On July 11th, PGE reported an incident at one of their turbines. It's a Siemens turbine. The rotor lifting hatch was found on the ground near the turbine. So it had detached from the turbine and hit the ground. So this is fairly new. We're still looking into this and trying to determine the adequacy of their evaluation and response. So we will be following up with you on this at a future date. And done several inspections recently on July 12th. Dwayne Kilsdon conducted an operational compliance inspection at the Carty Generating Station. They're doing some construction related to some relatively minor amendments that they've done. So he did that, and as well as the operational. On July 13th, he conducted a compliance audit inspection for the Coyote Springs cogen facility. And we will be issuing the reports and findings on these within the coming weeks. I talked about the next council meeting, so August 24th and 25th. So right now we're looking at it being Christmas Valley and Lapine, but we'll be in contact with you about that. And then last on my list is we have provided new laptops for all council members. We've provided the laptops to those of you who are in person. We'll be getting the others to the remaining council members shortly. All the information for logging in is on the box. So if you have any issues, please let us know. We'll work on that and help you get logged in. But hopefully it will work out very easily. If you need carrying cases, a mouse, any other aspects that would make it easier for you, please let us know. We can figure out how to purchase those. It should be fairly easy. And when you're ready, and there's no hurry on this, we will take your old laptops from you. But that could be at a future council meeting. And then lastly, somewhat related to this, I think it was triggered by these laptops. Councilmember Condon had brought up the idea at a future council meeting doing a training session. So to walk through, when Nancy sends you a link, an email with the link on it, how are you accessing documents? If you're downloading those documents to your computer, some of the documents are Word, some are PDF. How do you edit those? How do you, provide comments on those? So I thought it was a good idea. hour-long session, just kind of walk through all those things with you to give you an idea. And we could follow up on that with any materials to help you out. But yeah, we'll plan on doing that in the near term. So with that, I will conclude my secretary report, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any questions or comments for Secretary Cornett? All right, we will move on. So our next agenda item is agenda item C. We have the final legislative update. This is an information item. We have Christy Split, the Government Relations Coordinator, to present. And Christy, congratulations for surviving session.
Thank you so much, Chair Grail. So as I dig in on this, I want to open the door for you all to ask questions along the way. I'm obviously presenting remotely, so I'll need some help if I miss any hands up or anyone wants to interrupt, but just feel free to do that. And the other thing is I'm also going to welcome Secretary Cornett to almost co-present with me as he feels necessary to interrupt with sort of more detail or how some of what I'm going to talk about can affect your work down the road. He'll have a better understanding of that than I do. So I don't know if I need to do like the for the record thing, but I'm Christy Split, the Government Relations Coordinator for the Department of Energy, and I know many of you. So with that, we can go to the next slide and I'll kind of dig in on session and look forward to any questions or comments that you may have as I go through. And that is the hint for next slide. Nancy, thanks. So overall, I always think, if you remember, that talking about context can be really important. So before we dig in on energy themes and issues, I think it's really, I imagine that most of you are civically, all of you on council are civically aware and know that we had an unprecedented, longest in national history walkout that made session a little awkward toward the end, especially. We had a 6-week break in the state Senate being able to do business. And those who were still in the Capitol, including some of the folks who were not going to floor sessions for the Senate, continued to do the work of the legislature. So it was interesting. We had this walkout situation and nobody knew kind of what would happen with it, but we kept having committee meetings and moving bills through the process, figuring out the state budget. And so when in the end, frankly, much to my surprise, there was a deal brokered to bring everyone back to the Capitol and finish the session off and pass nearly every bill that needed to pass. Like, the walkout did not affect in the end the outcome of session, I would say. I just think it's really important context and to understand that it did make for sort of different circumstances than would have happened otherwise. So the bills may have passed or concepts may have passed, but things changed because of those dynamics. And so I'll just kind of go through a couple of things big picture, and then we'll dig in on citing specific issues. So one note contextually is that the state budget, the amount of money that the legislators were able to put into the state budget, was much higher than anticipated. For most of the legislative session, we were thinking that the budget would be relatively flat from the past biennium. The state budget's on a 2-year cycle. And so everyone sort of expected something relatively flat. And then to make room for new things, there could be cuts to existing programs. That was sort of the general expectation. And there's revenue forecasts periodically throughout each year. And the May revenue forecast is the one that is the basis for the state budget. And it was much, much higher than anticipated. And so with that additional revenue, there was a decision made to invest about $90 million in climate and energy programs that was not expected. So that made for a very interesting time for us at the Department of Energy. Nearly 45 million of that $90 million will come to our agency, and a lot of new work will be underway at our agency because of that. So just wanted to flag that for you all. Another thing that was unexpected was the development of packages. So as a way, I think this is right, as a way of figuring out how to have fewer bills have to move through the process in a shortened timeline because of the legislative walkout, they ended up putting together In the case of the climate package, for example, that's 20 different pieces of legislation that ended up in 2 bills. So that makes it really interesting to kind of look back and see what happened. If you look at the bill that passed, you'll get a very limited story versus if you break things out and look for those underlying bill numbers, you can find the public testimony, things like that. So I just want to flag that complexity as far as looking back at legislative history. And then finally, I want to flag as far as citing is concerned that it was a major topic as expected. Council heard about that from me, heard about it from Secretary Cornett, and also heard about it from some of the advocates that had put together a citing table. It never had an official name, that had spent a lot of time together, a lot of learning and talking together, introduced a few different possible pathways to pass legislation. I'll talk about what happened in the end with that package, but just wanted to kind of make sure you all know that was a major topic, and I think that it will continue to be a major conversation at the legislature going forward. So you can go back, Nancy, you were right with me, thank you. So as far as what was in the climate package, I wanted to just give, and so next slide, I just wanted to give just a quick sort of overview of what was in the climate package, unrelated to citing, and then we'll turn to citing. So, but all of these are energy related and of course would be of interest to any of you. There were additional dollars put into existing energy incentive programs. There was a kickstart on federal home energy efficiency and grid resilience programs. There was a building efficiency package that was 4 bills that got combined into one of those 2 bills I mentioned before. There were dollars for resilience, and that included for what are called hubs, which is sort of a big nebulous and new idea that includes a lot of different components that can help a community be better prepared for an emergency. And that includes some energy elements, and then also energy resilience planning. And then finally, the Oregon Department of Energy staffs the Oregon Global Warming Commission, and the underlying statute passed in 2007 and had not been updated since. I think you're all aware climate change has sort of evolved since 2007, and so the commission will evolve as well. That starts with a new name, the Oregon Climate Action Commission. I'm sure you'll hear us call it OCAC, and that will be coming with the new name and having some new members starting in the new year. There's also some scope of work changes for the Oregon Global Warming Commission. The department has been doing that work with 1/3 of a staff member since 2007, and now there will be 4 staff members for the commission. So it'll be a big change for our agency and for sort of a sister commission, since you are another commission within our family. So with that, I'll move on to the things that I think will be of most interest. But like I said, I always like to make sure you have a big picture understanding of what's going on. And probably the biggest bill of session for this particular group is a market change in jurisdiction for solar. And I know that you all heard about this concept along the way here and there. To be honest, it wasn't one that at the start of session we were expecting to see. It was not one that was being discussed at the citing table that we talked about earlier and that you heard from during the process. This was actually a concept that came from some developers, sort of appeared in a late breaking amendment a couple of weeks before what's called deadline day when bills move out of committee. And so it was a little bit of a surprise to us when it came forward. Many of you may remember that in 2019, there was a similar bill, and what it does is it changes the jurisdiction of counties and whether or not they can do energy facility siting. This bill was limited to solar. There was a similar bill 4 years ago that was broader. This one was just solar. And Todd was gracious enough to put together this table that we have used to sort of show that evolution over time. So 2329 was that bill 4 years ago. So 4 years ago, FSEC had this jurisdiction that did not belong to counties. Counties just had these smaller projects in that first column. And currently you can see there's sort of a range of when a county can do solar siting versus FSEC is the place for that to happen. And you'll see that now 4 years later, that's being increased again. I'll say there was, like I said, this was sort of a surprise to us and sort of came in a little late in the process. There wasn't any discussion really on this concept in House Committee, but there was robust discussion in the Senate and some amendments made to the concept, particularly around decommissioning, I would say would be a good shorthand way of putting it, just to make sure that counties are not left on the hook with cleaning up a site when it's no longer in use. And this is where I would love for for Secretary Cornett to feel free to weigh in. He's thought long and hard about this and maybe can talk a little bit about the effect that we expect it to have on the Energy Facility Siting Council. One thing I'll say is, if he doesn't want to, that's fine. But one thing I'll kind of say before I turn it over to him is, there's two ways to look at this. You can go back to that slide that had the table on it, if that's okay. There's two ways of looking at, there's kind of two ways of looking at this. I think our perspective has been, this is like FSEC losing some jurisdiction on siting. And the way that the developers, proponents of the bill, which included the Association of Oregon Counties, talk about it, is that it creates two pathways. And so a developer can choose to still go to FSEC versus going to a county, or these larger projects will continue to go to FSEC, the largest projects. So I'll kind of just leave it with that and then turn it over if Secretary Cornett has anything to say.
Christy, just a couple of add-ons. Nothing really new in this bill. This is everything that I'm going to talk about really kind of came out from 2329, but probably bears a little bit of repeating. So you can see there's three columns. The reason is because under House Bill 2329, projects that were currently under the jurisdiction of the county have to go through the county's conditional use permit process and whatever other standards they have. When House Bill 2329 passed, it created additional capacity. So those 2329 projects that you can see, the greater than, but up to, less than, or equal to, those have to do the county conditional use permit and additional legislative requirements under the bill. And Christy talked about under 3179, there was some additional language about decommissioning that would also apply to the 2329 projects as well. So really just there's a couple of different paths based upon the acreage size, even at the county level. So kind of a strange nuance, but just out of interest. The other thing that I will say is in this predated House Bill 2329, but developers can opt into FSEC even though it's less than FSEC jurisdictional. That language was clarified a little bit, and then counties can also defer to FSEC. There's sort of a nuance about when that can happen and some conversation or coordination with the developer. But theoretically, there is an opt-in for the developer and an opt-in or an opt-out for the county as well. So with that, unless council has any questions specifically on this. Oh, and then I guess the last thing that I'll say is no emergency clause on the bill. So assuming it gets signed by the governor, it would go into effect on January 1st. So
does anyone have any questions on this one? This is the bill that will have the most bearing on your work.
Christy, this is Marcy. Councilmember Byer has a comment or question.
Just a comment. Could we get a copy of this table?
yes,
It would be really helpful just to have that shorthand.
absolutely.
Thank you. And it sounds like just very much patterned after 23 or 3229.
Yeah, slight difference, but mostly the same.
Okay.
Just more acreage.
Yes, but with the opt-in, opt-out provision. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Councilmember Devlin.
Yes, just a couple of questions. One, is this structured, or perhaps even the previous legislation structured, so that if a proposed project is being approved at the county level, they have to meet the same criteria that we would have to state that a project would have to meet?
So Councilmember Devlin, no. The answer is our process includes, a lot more standards, more robust sort of analysis, and there's a lot of variation at the county level. So the way it works is most of these facilities would be located in exclusive farm use zone. Counties have the same base set of requirements established by LCDC. So they all have to meet those. Then they can choose to have additional requirements if they want. And there's a lot of variation in that county by county. And so some counties, if you compare certain standards at a county to FSEC standards, yeah, some of them, absolutely are comparable, but many are not. So on balance, I would say no, it is not the same thing.
Are there protections within the statute for public input at the county level?
That's very well defined in LCDC statutes and rules about notification and timing within that process. So that's been well established for a long time.
Okay. And Madam Chair, third question, is there any perceived possibility of how this is structured that an applicant could simply divide a project into different pieces to avoid FSEC consideration?
Yeah, good question, Councilmember Devlin. So several years ago, because we had seen that with wind projects, we at the early stages of solar created rules to hopefully prevent that from happening. So we have rules that essentially help to define when multiple single facilities are actually combined, one larger combined facility. So we have rules that hopefully will prevent that from happening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions, comment? Councilmember Condon?
Thank you. Just quickly, so that remedy, if you will, if a large company, parent company, has 3 different subsidiary companies and each applied separately, would those be considered as one under what you just talked about, a stacking of projects?
It does talk about parent company. The process with which the council would evaluate that, I wouldn't say is, incredibly black and white. There is variation, projects could be in close proximity that really are unrelated. And they could be owned by the same company or the same parent company, but they really are unrelated. So it's not just physical proximity. It's not just, is it the same parent company? It's a combination of variables that we would look at to come to a conclusion, at least to recommend to council whether we believe as staff that it's a single facility. So those things can be quite complex. And so we designed the rules to take into account, a lot of those variabilities.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Christy, back to you or back to Todd. Todd, Sam, back to you.
Great, sounds good. So on this one, we'll sort of stay tuned and see how it affects the work. And then moving on, I mentioned the siting table, an official name for a group that sometimes was over 100 people talking about siting issues together last fall. There was a bill, 3181, that is where it started out as a placeholder. That means a bill with not very much detail at all. There was an amendment with a ton of detail. That particular concept got moved to Ways and Means. And then from there, got amended down further into the work that you see here. This passed in one of those mega bills I talked about, House Bill 3409, but this is the underlying content came from the conversation of House Bill 3181. And basically, just to kind of back up a little on the siting table process, there were work groups and negotiations happening. I mentioned deadline day, which is the bill for the date by which a bill has to move out of its chamber of origin. And that date is really very crucial for getting sort of things lined up. And this was coming together like a week before that deadline. It was all very late breaking. And somehow in that negotiation, there ended up being sort of different bills that were out there that were coming from there was the bill from the table, but then there was these bills from the developers that included a lot of land use changes. There was a concept, I don't want to get too much into the weeds on this, but a concept that would have made it much easier to develop on exclusive farm exclusive farm use land that was located near, no matter the value of it, it could have even been high value, but if it was close to transmission lines, then it could become just sort of automatically eligible for solar siting. So there was some pretty bold changes that were being negotiated on that in the end kind of went away. And what got left was what we just talked about, that solar siting, that solar jurisdictional change. And so I bring all of that up as context because what in the end is going to happen is DLCD, as you know, has an exceptions process for exclusive farmland, exclusive forest land too, but mostly farmland for this conversation. And so DLCD is directed by, to create rules to allow local governments and FSEC to permit solar facilities and prioritize solar facility siting that does not conflict with natural resource lands and areas of valuable habitat. It's kind of the top line on this bill. The idea is really like, can we identify places more easily and sort of change DLCD's exceptions to make it easier for solar development to happen in these low conflict areas. And so DLCD will take the lead on this work. It will definitely have an impact in the siting process at FSEC and at counties where there are these conversations about the exceptions process. And this bill also directs the DLCD to put together a rules advisory committee. And I just wanted to flag that, state agencies are listed just as state agencies in the bill, but I promise that the Oregon Department of Energy will be part of that process in some way, shape, or form. We're an important voice on the issue, and because we have FSEC under our jurisdiction, so we'll be tracking this work really carefully, making sure that FSEC's interests are considered in the conversation. And then also, I just want to flag that I know you've all seen the Oregon Renewable Energy assessment tool, the map that that Wally in particular worked really hard on from our siting division, but the ERISA tool, and that tool could be updated as a result of this process as well. So just know that this is coming and was kind of the outcome of that sort of side conversation about land use changes, and also part of the siting table conversation that was happening. The siting table, by the way, was staffed by 3 groups, Verde, 1000 Friends of Oregon, and Renewable Northwest. They sort of concluded the work right when that deadline happened, but there was conversation about continuing the work in the future. So just know that that siting table could be back with us, perhaps with the same leadership, perhaps with different leadership, and we'll continue to hopefully be part of that conversation and process. Any questions on this one?
Christy, Councilmember Byer.
Hi. Oh, I can't hear you.
Just to clarify that this bill only applies to DLCD's exception process, not to the exception process set forth in the FSEC administrative rules.
For the record, I can answer that. Yes, Councilmember Byer, that's correct. So just to back up a little bit, most of LCDC's rules and statutes apply within FSEC's land use standard. This is where there is a difference. FSEC has its own statute. LCDC has its own statute for exceptions, and then LCDC has its rules, and then FSEC has its rules. So that's the one difference. And the big difference is this is one area you'd asked the question before, Councilmember Devlin, about kind of the comparison. This is one area where council's requirements are actually less than counties because under the FSEC goal exception, it does not require an alternatives analysis. So that is one area. So this will not apply directly to FSEC's rule or statute. However, there's a lot of work being done. There's a lot of evaluation. The exceptions, all the exceptions that we receive are reasons exceptions. I can't imagine that the work being done here won't have some influence in how council reviews and makes determinations on the goal exception. And there is a provision in the bill itself that requires the proposed rules come to FSEC for your not blessing, but essentially to share them with you to get your sort of evaluation and comments. So you will have a role to play in this rulemaking.
Questions at this time? Okay, please continue.
Thank you, Chair Grail. And this is the last concept I'm going to talk about. I'm not saying bill because it's another one part of one of those two large bills. There was a bill, it started out as House Bill 2534, and now it is in House Bill 3630, which is where it passed into law. This is a state energy strategy process that the Department of Energy will lead. Essentially, many other states have a comprehensive state energy strategy to help guide policymakers, decision makers in sort of how to allocate funds or how to figure out which programs the state ought to have to help meet the state's climate goals. And so the idea is, I kind of think of it as like a puzzle. We're going to put together the energy puzzle for the state together and find those gaps and overlaps and come up with recommendations to decision makers. This will not be setting policy, but we will be more like a report. And so this will be kind of a big process that the department will be undertaking. We absolutely expect siting to be part of that conversation. It's definitely an area that is ripe for conversation given the state's energy goals. And so I just wanted to flag it for you all and make sure you know that I think it will come up at that particular table. I can kind of just leave it at that. It's mostly just like a heads up right now. But I think it would be great to have the folks leading the state energy strategy work on your agenda from time to time periodically as the process unfolds. And I'll leave it at that. I'm happy to answer any other questions and we can go to the last slide.
Questions? None in the room here. Please continue.
Okay, thanks, Chair Grail. My last slide, when it goes up, I just wanted to make sure folks know that the Oregon Department of Energy 2023 legislative report is posted. The governor is still in the process of signing bills, so I'll be sort of updating with information about effective dates, whether or not bills have been signed, but sort of consider it. Here's where things were at the end of session. And in fact, it looks like the governor signed 3179 today. I just looked it up when Todd was talking and said, if the governor signs it, she signed it today sometime. So that has happened. And so, like I said, she's signing bills now. We'll keep posted there, but that report should be helpful to you. It has that table that you wanted a copy of. And so that link is in the slide deck. And if anyone has any questions for me, just feel free to reach out anytime. And we'll leave it at that.
Thank you. I'm looking around. I don't see any additional questions. I'd just like to say thank you for providing that and keeping us posted throughout this session. I'm sure we will anxiously be watching the outcome of some of the work that was completed. Thank you, Christy.
Thank you, Chair Grail, and members of the council. Have a great rest of your time in Eastern Oregon.
All right. Next on our agenda is agenda item D. We have the appointment of a consultant for Exhibit S review. This is the Historic, Cultural, and Archaeological Resources. This is an action item, and we have Sarah Esterson, Senior Policy Advisor, here to present. Sarah.
Thank you, Chair Grail. So good evening, members of the council. Again, my name is Sarah Esterson. I'm the Senior Policy Advisor with the Oregon Department of Energy Siting Division. And this agenda item today is a request for your review and approval of the department's use of a specialized consultant to support with review of technical materials for amendments and applications related to the council's historic, archaeological, and cultural resources standard. For a little context, we bring this type of request for your review for several reasons. We have several statutory provisions that apply. One is that when an independent review is needed, statute gives council the authority to commission support by a consultant. Statute also gives council the authority to exercise any additional actions necessary to fulfill their role. And we believe we have the need for some consultant support to support your review. We also have a statutory obligation to ensure that all of our costs in the siting division are necessary, just, and reasonable. So we bring this request to you as we are going outside of the siting division to make, to be transparent and to make sure that you agree. And I'll give you a little bit more context about scope and cost here in just a few minutes. So for a little more background, the siting division has an ongoing request for proposal process. It is on a 5-year cycle where we send out requests for, is it called a request for proposal? We send out a request for proposal for consultant, technical environmental consultant support. And the most recent cycle was in 2020. And as a result of that process, we issue a master services agreement. And then under that master services agreement, we would then come to council and get authorization for work order contracts. So in 2020, the RFP, the request for proposal, awarded a master services contract to Haley and Aldrich. And then with that, 2 sub-consultants were approved along with Haley and Aldrich, which is Golder and Historic Resources Associates. So I'm going to call them HRA, and they are a specialized consultant for cultural resource review. We have come to council a few times before, very recently, for this type of request. In December 2020, I came to you with a request to use HRA for 6 projects that were in the queue at that time. To address specific issues and availability and resources that were being experienced by our sister agency, the State Historic Preservation Office. 3 years later, we still have the same issue and the same needs. What we're experiencing is that archaeological and built environment reports are submitted to SHPO for review for our FSEC process, and nothing results. We're even having issues doing our normal coordination, communication. We send emails, we make phone calls. That's our normal process. We request to schedule meetings, and they're simply not available to support our need. So from our perspective, this puts both siting staff and council at risk. We don't have a subject matter expert that's reviewing our work and helping us review the applicant or certificate holder's work. So we are here today to request that council approve the execution of work order contracts through Haley and Aldrich for HRA on current projects in the queue, including Lone Pine to Whetstone Transmission Line, Cascade Renewable Transmission Line, Summit Ridge Wind Farm Amendment 6, Muddy Creek Energy Park, and Wheat Ridge Renewable Energy Facility Request 3, Request for Amendment 1. The work order contracts that we would be proposing to execute are equivalent in budget to our intergovernmental agreement with SHPO, so not to exceed 10,000. Of course, it can be more than that if needed based on specific issues, but that would be our starting point. As a quick reference point, when we came to you in 2020 and you approved that request, there were 6 projects in the queue. We proceeded or moved forward with 3 work order contracts, and those completed work on average of $6,000. So we're not blowing our budgets there. So the work order contracts that we're proposing would include tasks such as reviewing materials for applications and amendments that are related to the historic, cultural, and archaeological resources standard. Specifically, we may ask, the lead analyst can kind of decide what the scope needs to be, but it would be support in evaluating the studies that have been done, the evaluation of resources, the methods that have been used, and then once you move through that, evaluate the adequacy of avoidance and mitigation measures. And then reviewing of the department staff work. Are their recommendations adequate, valid, and complete? Those are the typical types of tasks we would ask of SHPO that we are not able to get completed at this time. So with that, I will hand it over to council for deliberation.
Thank you, Sarah. Are there any questions for Sarah at this time? Vice Chair Howell?
The list that you gave out, Lone Pine, Whetstone, Cascade, Summit Ridge, Wheat Ridge, and Muddy Creek and so forth. You said including, but it's not limited to those.
Well, our process has been for it to be project specific. So those are all the projects in the queue right now. Those are all the projects we have under review that don't already have prior council approval from that December 2020.
I'm just wondering if there's a chance something might come up that
Well, there is.
be in
Yeah.
addition to, and would they be able to be used then, or would,
Well, I think that our request, if you approve it for a project, it's all FSEC proceedings related to that project. So future amendments would be rolled in. What it doesn't cover is projects we don't have right now. So I don't know if there's space to review or to seek pre-approval. I mean,
Yeah, so I'll jump in for the record, Todd Cornett. In December 2020, was that the last time? There was some concern by council that we don't do this as a permanent thing. So at that time, that's why it was limited to those specific projects. That's also why we built in these specific projects. So including, but not limited to, it is just, that was our intent, was just these. And then if we had additional requests, we would add those at a future council meeting. I don't believe there's any limitation of you doing this, on a kind of a project by project basis or a time basis. I think that's your call to make. But again, we were sort of following the direction from last time we brought this to council.
I guess this is Ken. I guess I was thinking last time that was maybe an exception to the rule, or it seems like that there's a pattern. This is going to continue. It's kind of the new standard. So I'm wondering, should it be, are we limiting ourselves so that it's going to make more work for having come back and that kind of thing? So I'm just throwing that out there.
Yeah, I mean, it could be, we could come back on a yearly basis and reset it and just build it into, every January or every December,
That makes sense.
and then not be project specific, but we would sort of reset it. You could give us the discretion to decide when we use it. I mean, really, I think it's all over the kind of the board as to how you want to go. It's more about your comfort level, I think, than ours about this. So our system is designed for us to work with state agencies. They are a reviewing agency. We're required to provide notification. We will continue to do that. It's really your comfort level about our use of a consultant in this. And we don't intend certainly to cut out the State Historic Preservation Office. We would rather rely upon them because that's how it's designated. They just haven't had the capacity, don't currently have the capacity, and for the foreseeable future, don't look like they will have the capacity either to be able to timely review and comment on our projects.
Councilmember Condon?
Thanks. Just curious, does the process require the request of the agency before you engage a consultant? Does there have to be an affirmative, and we can't do it, or from SHPO? Does SHPO have to?
Not SHPO. The statute kind of related to this essentially says if a reviewing agency is unable to comment within the time frame that's required, that they can hire a consultant to conduct the work for them. It doesn't practically work very well because by the time we send them the notice, and then they don't respond, we're already running behind. So we've done this in a preemptive way. I think it still meets the purpose and intent of the statute, but it's not, in this case, SHPO or Parks Department doing it. It's we're doing it on their behalf with their full knowledge and understanding and agreement, I might add as well. So yeah, I think the way the statute is written sort of would do it on a case-by-case basis, but that practically doesn't work.
And
Thank
I
you.
would just offer that the rules require the lead analyst to send review requests, and we would still attempt that coordination. And so this is a backstop. And because contracting could take 3 months, we're just getting it in place. I think we're going to need it, but if not, because the above ground resources is a different group than archaeology, so it could be a hybrid, and it's insurance if we need it. So, thank you.
For the record, this is Marcy Grail. I am not a pessimist. However, I'm a realist, and I think anything we can do to not have a built-in delay is going to benefit all parties involved. And I'm in favor. I think having it specific is great. And obviously, if you need something different, then someone's going to bring it to the council and we'll address it at that time. But at minimum, I mean, we just went through this a couple of years ago. That seemingly got us to this point. We have it again. So I don't think we should try to build anything hard. I think we should see what occurs. But I think the intent is that we don't allow something that we know we must have to stop progress. Any further comments, questions? Vice Chair Howe? Oh, okay. Yes, you're anticipating, please. So if there are none, then this is an action item. And I would ask if anyone is prepared to make a motion.
Madam Chair, I move that I move approval of the department's use of consultants for review of Exhibit S for the Lone Pine to Whetstone Cascade Renewable Transmission Line and Muddy Creek Energy Park projects as presented and recommended by staff.
Thank you, Vice Chair Howe. I hear a second from Councilmember Devlin, and
Oh,
Modify the list of projects. Okay, so you said,
I need to.
you
add
said
someone.
Muddy Creek and Lone Pine. Did you say Cascade Renewable?
Yes, and
Okay.
Whetstone. So I think I need to add,
I think just Summit Ridge Wind Farm and Wheat Ridge Renewable Energy Facility
Okay.
3.
yeah, so I'll add Summit Ridge Wind Farm, Wheat Ridge Renewable Energy Facility 3. And I'm kind of thinking, as a preamble to those listings, should I say including but not limited to? Okay, I'm going to throw that in. And we'll see if we get a second.
okay, so Vice Chair Howe has added the including but not limited to. Is there a second, or does anyone have any comments about that?
Second comment.
We hear a second for the comment. Councilmember Condon looks like she wishes to say something.
Thank you. So that leaves it pretty open-ended for dollars and projects. Is that,
Dollars are still 10,000.
Yeah.
but not in the motion? I mean, do we have to be specific in the motion? If the dollars are limited? I mean,
Councilmember Devlin?
Madam Chair, I try to be agreeable. Since I seconded the first motion, I second the second. But it would appear to me if you add that language, that leaves it wide open to staff to add any projects they wish to add to it. And it puts in question, there's no time limitation on this motion. If they ever have to come back to approve this in the future.
Yeah.
So we have concerns about the motion of adding the additional language. So at this time, are there other questions, comments? Councilmember Byer?
Just a quick question, and I may have misunderstood this, but it sounds like the contracting document itself has a not to exceed $10,000. And so that caps the amount of expenditures if additional projects are added and it hits that $10,000 not to exceed, staff would come back to us with a recommendation to do a new amendment to that agreement to add additional funds. And I'm asking a question as I'm stating here. So I think as long as we take Vice Chair Howe's recommendation and include something about the not to exceed language, we should have a buffer, a cap.
So I thank you for your comments. So then I think the question becomes, and I just want to clarify, is it a cap per project or in totality? I think what we were trying to, and Sarah, by all means, hush me up, but I think the idea was you have these specific projects and we're going to focus on these projects. We've had conversations previously where concerns about are we relinquishing our duties and authority to staff without that check-in? And so I think before the motion was made or right after we discussed, hey, we're going to approve these as listed, as stated prior to the amendment to your motion. And then if something else happened, staff would come back and we would address that. And as we move forward with this, then we would learn whether we needed to do something different. That's what I thought we were going down. And then the additional language may have got us off track. So Cindy is shaking, Councilmember Condon is shaking her head, yes.
It's too open-ended, I guess, for me, but
The
Please, Vice Chair Howe.
the purpose of the amendment to add the language, including but not limited to, was to provide flexibility to the staff to not result in a delay in processing an application, with the understanding that it was a $10,000 amount.
right.
Is that per project?
Yes, per project.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so that is open-ended. So I guess, well, we can vote on it and then we can revise it if it need be.
Chair, I could draw a minor line if you want that time.
So Councilmember Devlin, I'm going to look across the table at our legal assistants, like where do we go? Just to make sure that everybody's on the same page. Do we vote as is and then, or do
You
we?
have a motion on the table.
Okay.
I'll tell you, my preference would be that you vote that one down and read new language into the record so we have a clearer record. But
Okay.
your call.
Thank you. So we are going to leave the motion as is. Do we need to restate that? Let's restate it, please. Vice Chair Howe.
Okay, I move that we approve the department's use of consultants for review of Exhibit S for the including but not limited to Lone Pine to Whetstone, Cascade Renewable Transmission Line, Muddy Creek Energy Park, Summit Ridge Wind Farm, and Wheat Ridge Renewable Energy Facility 3 as presented and recommended by staff.
Okay, we have a motion. It's,
Yeah, I said including but not limited to.
he just said at the beginning this time instead of at the end as he did previously.
Madam Chair, point of clarification.
Yes, please.
I really count here, there are 5 of us present.
And maybe Jordan, is Jordan
Is
on
there
the?
anyone on the line?
Councilmember Truitt is on the line.
It's a 6 of us present. And doesn't. Present.
Yes.
Yeah, it's cut in and out. True, it's present.
Okay, a majority of those present, as long as there's a quorum, not.
Correct.
The council.
Okay, so we have a motion. Do we have a second for the motion?
Still have,
Oh, I'm sorry. This is gone. Anyway, okay, so if we could please have Mr. Secretary call the roll.
Ann Byer,
No.
Cindy Condon,
No.
Richard Devlin,
Aye for now.
Marcy Grail,
No.
Ken Howe,
I made it, but I'm going to vote no.
Jordan Truitt,
No.
Chair, before you announce, I will change my vote to no.
Thank you, Councilmember Devlin.
motion does not carry, Madam Chair.
Okay, this is a first thing. Sorry for the bump. I apologize for not being smooth at this, but that's why we have Todd and Patrick here. Okay, so that was, that did not pass. I think we've had some discussion. Do we need any additional discussion or do we have a new motion?
New motion.
I think for the X.
Yeah.
To improve this, our process in this meeting and to move forward, Madam Chair, I move that we approve the department's use of consultants for review of Exhibit S for the Lone Pine to Whetstone Cascade Renewable Transmission Line and Muddy Creek Park projects as presented and recommended by staff.
Councilmember Condit, thank you. Councilmember
Second.
Devlin. Okay. We have a motion and a second.
Discussion,
Yes, Vice Chair Howe.
you need to add Summit Ridge and Wheat Ridge.
So I can tell you what is happening with this. We have the list where it has some background information and the actual motion, I believe, is omitting that. So it's just a typo in our document. So,
Okay.
okay, so we are going to add Summit Ridge Wind Farm to that list
And Wheat Ridge.
and Wheat Ridge.
Yes. Madam
Okay.
Chair.
Everyone's clear what we're voting on now. So we have a motion.
This can't, I'll second.
Vice Chair Howe has given us a second.
Can
Councilmember
we-
Condon.
Sorry, can we amend to add the full name of Wheat Ridge? Wheat
Yes.
Ridge.
Okay, so let's read this one more time, if that's okay. So the motion on the floor right now is for Lone Pine to Whetstone Transmission Line, Cascade Renewable Transmission Line, Summit Ridge Wind Farm, Wheat Ridge Renewable Energy Facility Site, Wheat Ridge Renewable Energy Facility 3, and Muddy Creek Energy Park. So we have a motion and we have a second on that. Mr. Secretary, please call the roll.
Ann Byer,
Yes.
Cindy Condon,
Yes.
Richard Devlin,
Yes.
Marcy Grail,
Yes.
Ken Howe,
Yes.
Jordan Truitt.
Yes.
Motion carries, Madam Chair.
All right. Thank you, Sarah, for your efforts here and thank
Thank
you
you,
for
Council.
everyone for your patience. That was wonderful. Our next item on our list is this is agenda item E. This is the initiation of contested case rulemaking. This is an action item and we will have Tom Jackman, the rulemaking coordinator, to present. Good afternoon, Tom. Evening.
Thank you, Madam Chair, council members. My name is Thomas Jackman. I am the council's rules coordinator. Today we'll be discussing the council's contested case rulemaking. We'll be giving you a brief history of this rulemaking and then discussing the proposed scope. We'll then be presenting staff's suggested rack for this rulemaking. And then finally, we will recommend that council approve the direction and scope of this rulemaking as presented today, and that council authorize staff to select rack members in the form proposed. Go ahead, next slide. So as part of the 2023 to 2025 rulemaking schedule that the council directed staff to prioritize work on the contested case rulemaking. This project is very timely as it on the heels of multiple significant contested case proceedings, and staff seeks to take those lessons that we've learned from those experiences while they're fresh to improve the process to facilitate and smooth out future contested case proceedings. If council is agreeable with our proposal today, what comes next is we're going to create a rack and we will develop a draft set of rules. Once staff is comfortable with the outcome of this process, draft language will be presented to the council for consideration and then submitted to the Secretary of State as part of a notice of proposed rulemaking, which will kick off the formal comment period. And then, assuming that goes smoothly, it will result in the adoption of permanent rules. Any questions about that? Next slide. So the scope on this rulemaking is fairly broad. The goal is to overhaul the contested case rules for FSEC, which are located primarily in Division 15. As part of that process, one of the big changes is that staff is currently considering is the adoption of the Office of Administrative Hearing Contested Case rules in place of the Attorney General model rules that we currently have adopted in our existing rule set. You know, and we basically, my predecessor and Patrick have, performed analysis, and I've looked at these as well, and identified that the OAH contested case rules are just, they're better. So they cover more issues, there's more clarity, and we feel that by adopting these and replacing the Attorney General model rules, that we will improve our contested case process. As part of this kind of overhaul and in taking this relatively significant step in our contested case rules, we also want to do kind of a comprehensive look to identify existing rules that we needed because we didn't have the OAH rules, remove those so we don't have any overlap and confusion, and then identify any gaps that are, would be helpful to smooth out our process that are not covered in the OAH rules, so as to reduce confusion and uncertainty. So this is going to be a pretty significant and important rulemaking that I will hopefully dramatically improve things and make participation in the contested case process easier for the public, easier to understand. And, it's important to remember that the point of the contested case process is to create a clean record for the Supreme Court to review. The legal process can be long and drawn out. And if we do our jobs right as part of this contested case process, if it goes well, then the record before the Supreme Court will be very clear, and the decision-making process will be more rapid. It'll be easier for them. They won't have to go back and seek clarification and remand, that sort of thing. So that is the goal, and it is the kind of primary driver behind this rule redo. Does anybody have any questions about our scope, our goal? No? I think it's pretty clear about what we're trying to do. We just went through several contested case processes. There was confusion. There were questions about various things, and I'll go over a couple of those here. Why don't you go ahead, next slide. And so let's talk a little bit about the OAH rules, first of all. So many agencies are obligated to use administrative law judges assigned by OAH for their contested case proceedings. The council is statutorily exempt from this requirement. So we can and have used other sources to act as the hearing officer in the contested case process. But even though council is not legally obligated, in recent years, it's worked out that council has appointed ALJs assigned by OHA to act as hearing officers for the council's contested case proceedings. However, despite doing that, we are not required to use the OAH rules, nor the model rules for that matter, for contested case hearings that are provided by the Attorney General. However, for many years, we have used the Attorney General model rules that were supplemented by additional rules. And as I stated, we've, upon doing a kind of thorough review of these kind of three rule sets, made a determination that, and of course, we're going to seek feedback from a RAC on this, that the OAH rules would improve the contested case process. Any questions? All right, next slide. Yeah. Sorry. No worries. Okay, so recent contested case proceedings have suggested there are several areas where participants are confused about their rights, about what they're obligated to do in the process. Apart from adopting the OAH rules and organizing them, moving them around a little bit in a structure that more closely follows the flow of the contested case process, which we think will improve the kind of readability and understand, improve the ability to easily comprehend the rule set. We're going to address other areas that participants have struggled with. And, we identified kind of 4 examples of these that have been issues recently, including, but not limited to, what is required to participate in a contested case, including whether a prospective party has raised an issue with sufficient specificity. So this is an important one. And our goal, we're not going to be, creating law here. We're simply attempting to make the existing kind of rules and legal structure or be reflected in the rules themselves. So whereas there is not apparently a lack of clarity on these topics, now the goal is that there will be increased clarity. So we're also going to be attempting to clarify the issue of what it means to be a limited party as opposed to being granted full party status, and what rights you have as a limited party versus a full party. Clarifying the duties of the hearing officer, including whether or not the hearing officer needs to conduct pre-hearing conferences and what orders the hearing officer needs to issue. And then also what can be appealed directly to council and what cannot if parties are unhappy with the proceedings.
This is Marcy. One of my questions, I think those of us have been around for any length of time, and anyone who's new has heard it clearly. The issue around sufficient specificity has come up regularly. So I think we're all aware of that. One of the things I guess my question is, do you have an idea, as you are responsible for getting this together with staff, how do we know that we're successful? And for me, that can't be that we have a couple contested cases and perhaps there's no fussing or thing. So for example, in my day job, the arbitration process was designed for a non-attorney to be able to navigate it successfully. Whether you got the outcome you wanted or not, you didn't have to be an attorney to get through it. So when I look at the contested case and I hear the public, I believe that's what part of their frustration is, that the average layperson can't navigate it. So I guess I just say that as a comment, but also as a question. I hope that when we get wherever we're going, that we have something in mind to say whether we were successful or not.
So as we are going to be adopting new rules, part of the rulemaking process is that whenever you adopt a new rule, you have to go back and look at it down the road to make sure you're successful. So definitely going to be thinking about that going forward. But in terms of the sufficient specificity, I think certainly going to be discussing that issue with the RAC and going to be interested to hear what their thoughts are on it. But we're also not limiting ourselves to just, what can we put in the rules. We're also thinking about, how can we provide prospective participants in this process with other resources, maybe templates or examples of other times that a party was, involved in a contested case process and that was determined that they provided, had raised an issue with sufficient specificity. So, those are the sorts of things that I think would be helpful. That being said, we are also going to try to make the rules be, there's always a balance between being too prescriptive in the rules and also providing enough flexibility, but flexibility can then result in confusion. And, so we're going to be, this isn't going to be, one and done with the RAC where it's like, what do you think, RAC? Okay, sounds good. We are anticipating multiple RAC meetings and a lot of, deep thought and analysis and discussion and feedback on, how to thread this needle and, in terms of evaluation, we'll just have to wait and see. But the goal will be that parties, who have participated previously, who participate again in the future, will be able to look at it and say, we understand the process better. We understand what was required of us. We want people to be frustrated with the results, not because they didn't understand, right? So, that's the point of improving the rules, is so that people can, the rules don't become a barrier, and understanding the rules aren't a barrier to the participating in the process. So.
Thank you. Condon?
Thank you. Just teeing off of what Chair Grail said, so, and you haven't talked about it, but the RAC formation yet, but with respect, other than just
Yeah, that was the
commenting
next
on it.
slide, but yeah, sure.
Right, but just for instance, the public that is contemplated here in the RAC, would you look to people who have been involved in the process and maybe did suffer that frustration, some frustration about the process? I mean, are you looking for people who have, or might you look for?
So we've already reached out to people just prior to this, just to see, assuming that you approve of this rack, would you be interested? How interested are you? Just to kind of gauge interest. And we have reached out to, several members of the public who did have participated in the contested case process previously. So the goal is that pretty much everybody on the rack will have some experience with a contested case process, regardless of what slot you're fitting in under. All right, fingers crossed. I mean, we haven't, nobody's, we haven't formed it yet, but that's the goal.
Okay, Councilmember Byer.
Question, if there's a way to kind of outline the pros and cons of the two different processes, both the model, order, the model code.
The Attorney General model rules, yeah.
Versus the hearing officer process. I think that side by side would be helpful to RAC members and to those of us who haven't been on the council long enough to have been through several contested case hearings.
Sure.
There are pros and cons kind of based on the experience.
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion. So I don't, yeah, kind of like, this in this particular area, whether it's a pre-conference hearing, the model rules are vague on this issue, but the OH rules are more clear about how this works or whatever. Yeah.
This provision isn't addressed by this code and just to sort of do that in analysis.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other? Okay.
Hey, keep going, please.
All right. At this time, staff recommends the formation of a RAC, which will be relied upon to provide feedback from interested parties about the proposed modification to the rules. And we are proposing a RAC consisting of 12 members. However, I kind of view this as a limit. I don't know for sure, based on kind of the preliminary feedback I received right now, that we will get 12 members. So I'm not worried about the RAC being too large, but kind of the idea is that we would have no more than 2, 3, 3, 2, 2 from each of those categories that we're going to be inviting to the RAC. But yeah.
Vice Chair Howe.
Thank you. Mr. Jackman, I was just wondering, I see it says included, but on the third bullet, reviewing agencies, does it include cities?
It does not include cities.
Shouldn't it? I mean, the facilities go through cities as well as counties.
For the record, Todd Cornett, very limited.
Oh.
Most of our facilities are not within city boundaries. There are limited, places where some of them do cross it, or could be within the analysis area, or they could be affected potentially by public services. But by and large, most of our facilities are in unincorporated areas and counties.
Yeah, okay. I guess I was thinking B2H most
Yeah.
recently.
Which does
And that's,
cross a little bit, but yeah, I think those cities, didn't participate tremendously, in the process either.
yeah, okay, thanks.
Thank you. Good question.
So I
Hang
think
on,
this,
Tom, excuse me.
yeah.
Councilmember Condon.
Thank you. I was just curious how you came up with the divide, like 2 investor owns versus 3 independent. What's the logic behind the number, the individual number?
The logic is kind of a recognition of the number of potential parties in that category. Sorry, repeat that. Yeah, so if you were to look at the pool of like potential participants, there are more investor or independent power producers than investor-owned utilities. So it's the goal for this particular RAC is going to be get people who can actually provide feedback. So it's going to be people who actually have participated in the contested case process. But yeah, I mean, then, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but.
So, the record, Todd Cornett, I can take a shot at that as well. Essentially, we want to keep it to a manageable size. So like number of people, too big, it's hard to get people together, and participating. So we want to keep it to a manageable size. We want to have, who really are and have and will be our stakeholders. And then we want a fair balance. We want, sort of not an oversized, industry perspective or public perspective or reviewing agency. We want to have as much balance on there as possible so we can truly get all kinds of, opinions representative of our stakeholders, but again, balanced.
Okay, thank you.
All right. You can have the floor back, Tom.
Okay, thank you.
Up,
Oh, sure.
Councilmember Devlin?
So Member Devlin, can you pull, so both for Councilmember Byer and Devlin, I've been told people are having a hard time hearing you online. So if you can move the microphone, yes, more closely, and press the button.
I'm not trying to pose a problem here, but having some experience with this, how are you going to go about getting the 9 tribal governments to agree on one representative?
Well, this RAC is kind of based on historical experience, and truthfully, we will send an invitation to all 9 of them, but it is highly likely that 0 of them will be interested. So we'd like them to be interested, and if 6 of them wanted to participate, we would probably try to make an effort to make room for them. But I anticipate 0 of them will respond. But that's kind of they're considered a reviewing agency, and that's where they would go on this RAC, in terms of the allocation.
I believe they should be there and there should be representatives there, but I know at times when we've tried to select from amongst the recognized tribes who to represent a particular issue, it has been difficult at times gaining approval from other tribal interests.
It's sort of one of those problems we kind of wish we would have. So it would be nice if we had more interest in from the tribal governments, but at least as of late, they haven't seemed to be too interested and haven't responded. However, we are going to be having a rulemaking coming up that's going to deal with tribal resources and involvement with tribal governments. So we're hoping that they'll be more interested with that one. But yeah, good question though.
This is Chair Grill. My experience is that they communicate and they will figure it out. That's been my experience with my own personal world. When you look at the investor-owned utilities, there are more than 2 that roll through the state of Oregon, and they I shouldn't say usually, but they frequently have discussion and they may submit comments together and come to it. So I think some of that burden is on them to work together and collaborate.
Chair, again, for the record, Todd Cornett. It's also important to note this is not the entirety of the rulemaking. So this is to help us vet ideas, draft rules. There will always be, at every RAC meeting, it's a public meeting. So at every RAC meeting, there will also be an opportunity for public comment. So, if an entity is not chosen and it still wants to provide some ongoing input, there is an opportunity. There's nothing that precludes them from communicating with Tom and providing information to him, and then ultimately we will have a notification and a comment period and a public hearing. So this, again, want to make sure that everybody's tracking. This is not what is going to absolutely create the rules. It will help to create the rules. It has a tremendous value in creating rules, but this is not everything. There are other opportunities to participate as well.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Okay, Tom.
All right. Go ahead, next slide. Okay, so at this time, staff recommends that council initiate formal proceedings on the contested case rulemaking, which was approved for the 2023-2025 rulemaking schedule. Staff recommends that council approve the scope and general direction of the changes that staff has suggested and presented today, and staff requests that council approve the creation of a rulemaking advisory committee for this rulemaking with members to be assigned by staff. through invitation and pleading.
Thank you. Questions, comments? All right, at this time, I am seeking a motion on the recommended action.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Vice Chair Howe.
I move that the council initiate the contested case rulemaking with the scope and objectives recommended by staff and approve the creation of a rulemaking advisory committee as presented in the staff report. I further move that the council delegate the authority to appoint specific members to the rulemaking advisory committee to the department.
Thank you for that motion. Do we have a second? I see Councilmember Condon willing to make that second. Thank you. Any additional comments? Hearing none, Mr. Secretary, please call the roll.
Jordan Truitt,
Yes.
Richard Devlin, Kent Howe,
Yes.
Cindy Condon,
Yes.
Ann Byer,
Yes.
Marcy Grail.
Yes.
Motion carries, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Tom, thank you for your efforts, and we will look forward to working through this with you.
Madam Chair, if I
Yes.
may just make a note for, I think there's probably been some confusion, those who have come online and walked into the room while we're handling other agenda items. So just for clarity, everything we've done so far is not related to the Boardman Hemingway draft proposed order hearing for tonight. There's some other agenda items, administrative matters that we've been taking care of. So we set a time certain, or at least no earlier than 5:30, which is 5:31 right now. So if council would like to take a break, we can take a break. But shortly we will be beginning the Boardman Hemingway agenda item.
Thank you. So the time's 5:31, and I propose that we take a 10-minute break to get ourselves back ready to move into the Boardman to Hemingway project. So we will resume at 5:41. Thank you. like to hand the remainder of tonight's meeting over to Vice Chair Howe. Thank you.
Chair Grail, this is the public hearing on the draft proposed order on the request for Amendment 1 for the Boardman to Hemingway Transmission Line Site Certificate. I, Kent Howe, Energy Facility Siting Council Vice Chair, am serving as the presiding officer for this hearing. Today is July 18th, 2023. The time is now 5:44. This public hearing is being held at an Energy Facility Siting Council meeting in person at the Oxford Inn Suites Conference Room in Pendleton, Oregon. This hearing is also being held via a WebEx webinar with a call-in option for those who cannot participate in person or via webinar. Kellen Tardiweather, Senior Siting Analyst at the Oregon Department of Energy, will provide an overview of the amendment process and changes proposed for the amendment request. Ms. Tardiweather, you have the floor.
For the record, Kellen Tardiweather, Senior Siting Analyst, Oregon Department of Energy. Thank you, Vice Chair Howe. And I want to welcome folks that have joined us in the room here tonight and online. And I'm just going to get underway with my presentation overview here. Oh, I do want to say there is a little bit of lag in between when because I'm running the PowerPoint presentation. There's a little bit of lag in between when I change the slide and then when it goes on our screen here in the room, and I imagine online. So just bear with me, but if I'm talking and you're not seeing anything, just give it a couple seconds. So this is generally what we're going to be talking about tonight. I'm going to be describing what the approved facility is and the siting process. I'm going to go over what the amendment request is, and then we're going to discuss the steps associated with the draft proposed order and the comment period on the draft proposed order. We're then going to have a public hearing where Vice Chair Howe is going to be the presiding officer. Both he and I are going to provide an overview of the requirements for commenting on the DPO. And then we'll have the public hearing. So, and this is not specific for B2H. This is generally the format that we have for any hearing on a draft proposed order for type A amendments. And so the certificate holder, who's Idaho Power, will have an opportunity to provide comments on any aspect of the DPO they'd like. Members of the public will be allowed to provide oral testimony or written testimony. And then council will be provided an opportunity to make comments or concerns that they have. And then it'll end with an opportunity for the certificate holder to respond to any of the council or public comments. So for folks that are not familiar with the Energy Facility Siting Council, we call them EFSEC or council. And the council's process is intended to be a consolidated review. So it's a place where a energy developer or an applicant or a certificate holder can come to get the various permits necessary to construct and operate an energy facility in one place. The council is made up of 7 members that are governor appointed, Senate confirmed folks with a diverse array of backgrounds from all over the state. Myself and my colleagues in the siting division at the Oregon Department of Energy are staff to EFSEC. We provide legal and technical review, project management, and do things like we're doing today to assist council in their review and decision making. Folks that are familiar with the process, this slide is a little bit small, so I apologize if it's hard to read for the folks here in the room. This is very typical of, this is for an amendment, but anybody that's also used to seeing an application for site certificate, we have the same process steps. Functionally, amendment follows the same process steps that we do for an application for site certificate. Both a preliminary amendment and a preliminary application are submitted in a preliminary form, and we go through a rigorous completeness review. back and forth with a certificate holder until we deem a amendment complete. And then we post the complete amendment and use the information from that complete amendment to draft findings and recommendations in a draft proposed order. When we issue that, we issue notice. Excuse me, and then that stems a comment period with an in-person hearing for type A amendments, which is why we're here today. Then there are additional steps. There are still more steps. I'm going to talk about more them later, but one of the takeaways for folks that I want them to see from this is that we're about in the middle of the process. There's still more to go. This is not the end to when council makes a decision on this amendment. So just a quick overview of what the approved facility is. So back in September last year, council approved the application for site certificate and issued its final order and executed a site certificate for the Boardman to Hemingway transmission line. In that site certificate and the final order, it approved what was then called the proposed route, which became the approved route, which again, hard to see in this figure, which is the red line. And then part of the application included several alternatives. And so those alternatives had names like the Morgan Lake alternative, which is now just the approved Morgan Lake alternative. And then there were several rebuilds associated with that approval as well. The related or supporting facilities included with the transmission line include several access roads. It also includes multi-use areas, which are construction sites, pulling and tensioning sites, communication stations. Also in that approval, council approved a Longhorn substation in Boardman. And then this facility crosses 5 counties in Oregon. So what is in request for amendment 1? Okay, so let's see. Request for amendment 1, the certificate holder is requesting functionally to add in more alternatives. So just how in council's final order where council approved the main route and alternative routes, that allows Idaho Power in its final design to select either route. So here, Idaho Power is requesting additional routes to retain the flexibility to then construct those routes. So RFA 1 includes combined 8.8 miles of transmission line reroutes in 3 areas and about 46 miles of modified road reroutes. And we'll look at some maps and see that a lot of those roads are kind of associated and just a little bit of a bump out of a previously approved road. And then Idaho Power also requests to amend site certificate language. Now, and that is in RFA 1. Now, in the draft proposed order, folks will see that the department actually makes several recommendations for amended condition language 2. And a lot of this is just kind of like looking and reading the condition, understanding what it applies to, and to make it more clear and better implemented. There's also descriptions and rationale for those revisions in the draft proposed order. And make a note when we get to the slide about the scope. Okay. Oh, ooh. Oh, that's real loud. You. When I get to the slide where we talk about the scope of council's review, I'll kind of try to remember to touch on this. But if it's pretty much anything in that draft proposed order is open for comment. So if folks would like to comment on any aspect of that draft proposed order, they may do so. So there's our slide. Okay. Again, a little bit hard to see in the room, but this is the Little Juniper Canyon alternative in Morrow County. The shaded area is the approved route. And so we can see here, this is just kind of a little bit of a bump out extension of that approved route. The Little Juniper Canyon is a 1.4 mile alternative, and the segment it would replace is 1.3 miles. So this is 0.1 miles longer than the approved route. And then here, this is going to kind of stagger in here. This is in the order kind of going from north to south. And then this is the True Blue Gulch alternative in Baker County. There it goes. So this is what I call like the elbow. It kind of comes down from the previously approved route and then turn to then connect back up with the previously approved route. The True Blue Gulch alternative is 4.6 miles. It would replace 2.9 miles. So this would be 1.3 miles longer than the approved route. And then lastly, we have the Durbin Quarry alternative. We're down in Malheur County for this. And this is similar to that Little Juniper Canyon. It's just a kind of a minor adjustment from the approved route. And this was to avoid impacts to an ODOT rock quarry. And this alternative is 2.8 miles, but the associated approved segment is also 2.8 miles. So there's no difference in distance with this alternative. Okay, so this is my scope of review slide. I'm gonna try to leave here. We're gonna go on a little trip. Bear with me. Okay. Then I can't see anything. Oh no. Okay. Hold on. The header. All right, there we go. Oh well, there's a lag, so bear with me. Okay. It's all part of the grand scheme of things. Here we go. Okay. And share. Okay. All right. And we're going to do what we love doing in our industry is staring at some rules. Let's see if I can make it bigger. Okay. So this is the in Division 27, this is like where council's rules for amendments are. So this is what we look to when we get various amendments, because as council's familiar, amendments to site certificates come in kind of all forms and shapes and sizes. So so really what the question is, the question that council is answering. This is the preponderance of evidence, right? To grant an amended site certificate, council must determine that the preponderance of evidence on the record supports the following conclusions. So now this is so here under A, so when we're adding area to a site boundary, the question is that are the portions of the facility added to the site boundary, do those comply with the laws and council standards? So that's really what we're looking at for this, because we're adding areas to the site boundary. And then for B, this is a construction deadline extension. So this is not what we're looking at here, but this is just kind of to compare. The question's a little bit different of what council is finding depending on the amendment. And so really for a construction extension, we're after considering like changes in factor law, that the question is does the facility complies with all council standards? And then we don't need to belabor this too much. And then, so for a request for amendment not described above, then councils would be finding, careful, it'll stop, there we go, that the facility with the changes complies with the laws. So there is that. I'm going to try to go back. So I wanted to go through that. I don't know if council has any questions, but I just think that is interesting, and it helps guide when you're reviewing the draft proposed order. That is the question that we ask ourselves, and that is the framing of the findings in the order. I'm going to, just because I'm not sure if there's a lag, I might have to reshare. So I'm going to stop and then, or maybe I'll wait to go back to my PowerPoint presentation because it's not. Just bear with me. Thank you. Okay, and then, so preponderance of evidence, more likely than not, that the information in the record supports this finding. And then so just reiterating that the record for this project is very large. It includes the application for site certificate, final order, contested case, and now it also includes RFA 1. So a voluminous record. For all amendments, council is also required to find that the bond or letter of credit is adequate. The next slide is our procedural history. I don't need to belabor this too much. We got the preliminary RFA in December. We're here in July. The record is scheduled to close at the end of this evening, in which case, whether it closes or not, the next process step after the record closes is that council will review the draft proposed order. So the issuance of, this is more of like kind of the process steps. So the issuance of the draft proposed order, as I mentioned, starts a comment period. This has been a 34-day comment period. And it is pertinent if members of the public would like to proceed further, or reviewing agencies would like to proceed further in the process, folks have to comment while the record is open. So before the record closes at the end of the hearings. Excuse me, folks may comment by mailing me a comment, emailing me a comment. We have an online portal where you can submit comments, you can hand deliver them. You could also provide oral testimony here in person or via the webinar or phoning in. I'm going to continue on the next slide, but it's critical that anybody who wants to participate further comments on the record because council cannot and will not consider any comments that are submitted after the record closes. They basically are not added to the record. Anybody that would like to participate or request a contested case proceeding must comment on the record of the DPO. And then for consideration in a contested case request, issues they have to be submitted within the time frame. They have to be within council's jurisdiction. And they have to include sufficient specificity, which means providing some sort of facts to support the position or issue. So with sufficient specificity with facts so that the council, department, and certificate holder can understand the issue and are afforded an opportunity to respond. So I'll build out a slide here because for this project and for a lot of folks who have followed this project are well aware, we had a very long contested case process on the application for site certificate. And we do want to highlight that the threshold for a contested case on an amendment is different than it is for an application. All applications have an automatic contested case. For an amendment, there's an opportunity to request a contested case. And then here again, the question council looks at, if council gets requests for contested case, what council's going to be looking at is, does the issue provided in there, well, one, did they meet all the criteria, comment on the time frame, sufficient specificity within the jurisdiction of the council, but then council's going to ask itself, that does the request raise a significant issue of fact or law that's reasonably likely to affect the council's determination of whether the facility with the change meets the applicable laws. And then there's the scope of council's review. That really the question in the DPO is that, does the preponderance of evidence demonstrate that the portions of the facility added in the site boundary meet the applicable council standards? Secretary Cornett and our communications team have put together just a 10-minute PowerPoint kind of going over the details of the request for contested case and the thresholds and the evaluation criteria that council would look at. That's available on our webpage. There's also a link to it in the public notice. Now, if council gets a request for contested case, the options that council will do are to hold a contested case on properly raised issues. Council may also evaluate those requests for contested case and determine that there are properly raised issues that would merit a change in the proposed order, and they can remand that proposed order back to the department to then review or revise based on council direction. And then council can also deny the request for contested case. So that is my portion. I'm going to pass it off to Vice Chair Howe, who's going to be the presiding officer for the hearing. Just give us a little bit of time because Nancy, I'm going to pass it back to you. Okay. Just a little bit of technical stuff here. Just there we go. And Vice Chair Howe, you have the floor.
Started the purpose of tonight's public hearing is to provide an opportunity for the public, reviewing agencies, council, and the certificate holder, if they wish to do so, to present oral and written testimony on the amendment request and the department's draft proposed order. The 34-day public hearing comment period on the draft proposed order is scheduled to close at the conclusion of tonight's public hearing. Next slide, please. At the conclusion of the presentation, I will call on each person interested in providing oral testimony, starting with the certificate holder, then people in person, then on the webinar, then on the phone. Tonight's hearing is being recorded. The presentations, written comments, and oral testimony are part of the decision record for the amendment request for the facility. Next slide. Pursuant to OAR 345-027-0367 sub 5A and B, please note the following. A person who intends to raise any issue that may be the basis for a contested case must raise the issue in person at the hearing or in a written comment submitted to the Department of Energy before the July 18th deadline, and with sufficient specificity to afford the council, the Department of Energy, and the certificate holder an adequate opportunity to respond, including statements of fact that support the person's position on the issue. In the Type A review amendment process, to justify a contested case, issues must be determined by FSEC, the Energy Facility Siting Council, to raise a significant issue of fact or law that is reasonably likely to affect council determination of compliance with an applicable standard. Next slide. To raise an issue in a contested case proceeding, the issue must be within the council jurisdiction, raised in writing or in person prior to the close of the record of the public comment period, July 18th, 2023. Raised with sufficient specificity to afford the council, the Department of Energy, and the certificate holder an adequate opportunity to respond. To raise an issue with sufficient specificity, a person must present facts that support the person's position on the issue. Next slide. For any individuals wishing to provide testimony during tonight's hearing, for the record, please include the following with your testimony: full name with spelling, physical mail or email address. Okay, and then next slide. Is the certificate holder here tonight, and do they wish to provide testimony?
Yes.
Okay.
Vice Chair, council members. My name is Joe Stipple, S-T-I-P-P-E-L. I'm from Idaho Power. I'm the principal project manager in charge of B2H. Thank you to staff for taking the time to review our request for amendment. A lot of the work that we've been doing with outreach with individual landowners, and as we're moving towards construction, is basically the result of this amendment. We've worked with a lot of landowners, and the transmission line changes are really a direct result of working with those individuals to minimize the impact on their property. So we've spent a lot of time in the field vetting our route, and some of the access roads are a result of that as well, to make this a constructible project and move forward towards breaking ground this fall. And I just want to thank staff and council for taking a look at the amendment.
Question from council? Okay, thank you, Mr. Sipple. Next slide, please. Oh, it's coming. So are there individuals in the room that wish to provide testimony? Maybe get a show of hands so we get an idea how many might testify. Any idea on the people that are on the webinar? Maybe they could show their hand or something. Okay, so it sounds like a couple. Okay. Ms. Gilbert is filling out the registration card available, and so we're ready for you.
Well, in Baker, I took the time to take one issue and talk about it quite a bit. Tonight, I will say that I have not prepared anything formal, but I wanted to make some general comments about some general issues that that hopefully Stop B2H will have submitted before this hearing is over. I know somebody's working on them right now, but anyway, I would like to, I'm Irene Gilbert, Gilbert. So thank you for hearing from me. And I must say to start.
Address?
2310 Adams Avenue, LeGrand, Oregon. And I'm speaking on behalf of the Stop B2H Coalition, the public interest, which is who I represented during the initial site certificate process, and also myself as an individual. So I have kind of a three-pronged representation here. And I wanted to start out by saying I am a bit concerned regarding the focus during this introductory phase of the, I've heard about 3 times that the council has the opportunity to determine that the contested case would not affect any of their decisions about a site certificate. And I guess the request that I would make is when these contested case rules are being reviewed, I would really like to see that statement sort of honed out so that the council has some idea of what they're basing a decision on, sort of justifying tossing out a contested case based on an assumption that it wouldn't affect their decision. And I don't know, I hope that makes sense to you, but just that statement, it wouldn't affect their decision. I'm not sure what that means. It seems real subjective to me. So just a comment. And also, I'd like to make a preemptive statement and request, and this is due to the fact that Stop B2H was quite surprised during the previous contested case hearings when we found that we were going to only be considered limited parties and would not be allowed to speak on all of the topics that were being presented. I was also surprised that I was not allowed to comment on anything that I hadn't submitted since I was there representing the public interest. So just to, as a result of that, there were some really interesting things that happened during that contested case process. One being that Idaho Power was able to remove the pre-construction survey requirements for bats. So when the final site certificate came out, there are a lot of us who feel that surveys for bats are really important. And there none of that is now in the site certificate. And so unless Idaho Power chooses to disclose in the course of construction that they've run into a bat hibernation area, and even if they do, they're just supposed to send in something that says, we found it and this is what we did. So I'm concerned that that kind of thing happens. And also there were changes that they were made regarding the surveys and using, rather than species specific surveys, using this, I forget what they call it, but basically a walkthrough where you just see what species you see in your walkthrough, rather than having surveys that were specific to animals that are at risk. So again, those were two issues that were of serious concern to me, that I was denied any opportunity, as was everyone else, to comment or object to. So trying to be preemptive about that not happening again. I don't know who all has submitted comments, but I would like to incorporate into my presentation any and all comments that come before council, so that Stop B2H doesn't face that same kind of limitation if we are again told that we can only be limited parties. I want to establish that we may very well be interested in making comments on other comments. So I hope that's okay. The other, I'm just going to quickly go through really broadly some concerns that I have. And like I say, some of these are honed out a little more, hopefully, in what you'll get before 6:30 or whatever it is, 5:30. The fire plan site certificate change. I am concerned about this fire plan. And part of the reason is because it references the OPUC, Oregon Public Utilities Commission, fire management plan. And during the OPUC hearings, they stated that they don't develop fire management plans for the construction period. Their plans are all focused on after a development is actually in place and operational. So starting out, and this was one of those site certificate conditions that I understand I can talk broadly about in terms of the impact to the entire facility. I hope that council will not accept that as sort of the basis of a fire management plan, since they say that they're not addressing construction issues. The other thing, I actually sat there and wrote this down just now, so excuse me if I'm kind of hesitant here. The other thing that I'd like to say about the fire management plan is, and again, a lot of this is information that came from disclosure during the Oregon Public Utilities evaluation of the Certificate of Public Convenience and Necessity. And even though they weren't evaluating the fire plan, I found it interesting and concerning that their arguments around things like whether or not lightning would be an increased risk in Eastern Oregon. They based their comments saying that it was not going to be create an increased risk. And their data was a paper that was developed that compared Eastern United States lightning with Western United States lightning. And given the fact that there are all kinds of local plans and local data about fires that have been started by lightning and what they're started by, who they're started by, I really would like to see any fire management plan be required to focus on local data. I'm guessing that that's part of the reason why Idaho Power is claiming that there are no high risk, no red zones along the entire route of the B2H line, which I find that I would be happy to challenge that. Okay, the other thing about fire management is they don't consider things like the injury to people, injury or death to citizens in evaluating the fire management plan. I think that should be a part of any evaluation. For instance, there are some areas like at the Morgan Lake area where They're going to run right through there. There's one road in, one road out, and people are not going to be able to get out if there's a fire, and they have a bunch of fire trucks and things blocking those roads, or emergency vehicles won't be able to get in. So I'm hoping that council will make sure that any changes to the plan address the safety of citizens. The other thing, I didn't realize till the night before last that I could make these comments on the Broad facility, so I apologize for stumbling here. But the bond amount, as you know, has been a source of concern for a lot of us. And I guess what I'd like to do is, when you're considering approving this proposed site certificate, please read the actual language of the rule when it comes to the bond, because you were advised to look at only the part of that rule that says the council will determine the amount. There's a complete sentence there that says the council will determine an amount adequate to restore the facility. So in my way of thinking, if it's adequate to restore the facility, then the $140 million or whatever the figure that you came up with, you have determined an amount that's adequate to restore the facility. So a $1 bond amount is not going to address that issue. The other thing is, because of the reason for that bond, it's to address unpredictable, unforeseen kinds of events like fires or tornadoes, or one of these companies declares bankruptcy. So the idea of being able to change the bond amount to deal with future changes 5 years down the road, you're not going to know it. 10 years, 50 years down, because they're all future events. That's what we're addressing here and trying to protect the public from. Anyway, I remember hearing arguments about this bond amount, and I remember Oregon Department of Energy, one of their representatives came before the council and said, maybe some of you will remember that they were looking for a way that was fair to the developer and fair to the public. And as I read the bond amount information, I have difficulty figuring out how this criteria is really is fair to the public or fair to the state of Oregon, because those are the people that this bond is supposed to be protecting from the risk of having to pay for all of these, any kind of consequences as far as restoration of the site. The other thing that I don't meant to be here, but the other thing with the bond, since you're considering, obviously considering, there was a lot of talk about the risk. Let's see if I can get what I think. And whether or not there was a significant risk posed by Idaho Power, and the decision was, gosh, they're a really strong player, and we think that the likelihood is not high that they're going to avoid this or walk away from this project. But now we have PacifiCorp involved in this, and you can't help but know that PacifiCorp does not have a good track record. And I mean, I'm just going here. Statesman Journal article dated March 1st. The Labor Day fires explode. Pacific Power employees worried the power lines were at fault. Things like all these headlines that happen. OPB, PacifiCorp liability for Labor Day fires. Electric utility, PacifiCorp sued. And their article saying they have been found liable, not only for the whatever, $1 million settlement that recently occurred in the Portland case, but that decision said they were liable for all of these additional fire consequences. So even in the article, and I think I included the article that said this, but the PacifiCorp representative said that this could amount to billions of dollars, and it could affect their financial stability as a company. So So to say that there isn't a risk, even more than normal, of this company having, going belly up or declaring bankruptcy doesn't seem to be supported by by the facts. Now, Idaho Power has also been hit with, I think, $1.2 million liability. It was a negotiated decision about a fire that they were accused of causing on U.S. Forest Service land. But all in all, this issue of fires and the fact that we know fires can result in a company going bankrupt, and it's all right there. Last issue. And on this one, like I say, I did not realize until the night before last that I could comment on significant changes to these site certificate conditions. So one of the ones that is causing me some concern, because I just ran out of time, is this site certificate condition says that the vegetation management plan is finalized. So I have not reviewed the vegetation management plan. I do know that during the previous activities related to this, this plan is required to comply with OAR 345250016. And the plan does not provide for assuring that noxious weeds do not impact wildlife habitat, or it's limited in the area that they are going to cover. It doesn't provide for monitoring for the life of the development. And so I'd like to incorporate, because I know that I don't have my act together on this, and I didn't even send in anything in writing or provide anything in writing. I'd like to incorporate the comments that were made by Stop B2H in the prior decision process, and also Susan Gear, who made several submissions about it. But I am requesting that, since the notice to the public did not indicate that the site certificate condition changes allowed me to comment on more than just the amount of area that was added, I would like a few days or a week to put together written comments related just to this one issue. I did my best to throw together stuff on the other things, but this one I just plain ran out of time. So you're getting my verbal comment and my best effort here, but I realize that it's probably lacking. So any questions about any of those? Like I say, I kind of skimmed over a bunch of stuff, but no.
Any questions from council?
Vice Chair, just for kind of a procedural, so Ms. Gilbert has requested a time extension, so we'll hold that over until the last public comment is made and Idaho Power has an opportunity to respond to anything. And then at that point, we'll bring it up to council to determine if you want to hold the record open or not.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay. Nancy, could you check the webinar and phone to see if there's any other members of the public that wish to provide testimony?
Vice Chair, I do not see anyone with their hand up. Jim, just go ahead and read out. Congratulations. Yep. Maybe again. We put it down. There is that. Okay. All right, Jim, I've got you unmuted. You can go ahead and speak if you would like.
Okay, thank you very much. I've got John Williams here, who is going to make a comment, and then I may say something when he's done, but I give him the floor.
John Williams at box 1384 LeGrand. That's WILLIAMS, LeGrand, Oregon 97850. I own land west of Morgan Lake, parcel 03 south, 37 east, 01300. I've given permission for several surveys done by contractors for IPC to take place on my property. I also in my data request asked for IPC to share data gathered in all reports the contractors had or will submit. IPC responded that no reports were generated, but shared some notes taken. Missing in these notes are pertaining to the, can't read my own writing, Goshawk, Raptor, land, and geotechnical drilling or access, the last of which hasn't been started yet. Of concern to me and what I wish to contest are the sightings of 3 towers and the disregard of SHPO guidance in regard to buffer between any construction around archaeological sites. One of the contested tower sightings is near, as I can tell, from the map provided by Odo, the tower is ML5/4, is sited only a few feet from the Peach Canyon Fault, considered a major fault by geological map conducted in conformance with ORS 516.030, funded by Department of Geology and Mineral Industries, Oregon Department of Geology and Mineral Industries, under the contract with U.S. Department of Energy, DE-FC-07-79ET-27220. Geology by Warren Barish, John D. Kaufman, and John G. Bond in 1980. Again, the geological drilling and access survey has not yet begun. Another tower, ML6-3, is sited in a wetland west of Twin Lake. Should involve more or better investigation. The third tower, ML62A, is sited, it appears, on a pre-contact cultural resource polygon 8B2H-DM-52, as with a cultural resource point located within a direct analysis area B2H-DM-47. SHPO guidance strongly recommends a 30-meter buffer between any construction and an archaeological site. I also contend the amendment and project are not in compliance with OAR 345-021-0010 IS. Therefore, I would like to have a contested case. Thank you.
And
Any
I
questions from council of Mr. Williams?
Cindy Condon, I'm just wondering if Mr. Williams will provide his comments in writing.
That'd be a good idea if he can. Mr. Williams, did you hear that?
Yes, I did.
Could you do that?
By the time the meeting's over.
Oh. Well, guess we rely on the transcript.
can transcribe it and type it in and get it to you, but I do not know if we can do that by the end of the meeting today.
That was not right from. The writer, that read.
The existing sheet
Excuse me, what was that again?
Record top. Was that already prepared and you simply read it?
Yes.
Because if you read it verbatim, it's already in the record. You can just provide the written version as long as it's exactly the same. So we already have it in the record. You could submit it after the close of the record because you already testified to that as long as it's verbatim. But it would be helpful for us to get that in writing.
Okay.
Okay. We can do that and give you the handwritten version and the transcribed version or our typing of it.
That would be helpful. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Kreider.
I just have two kind of quick comments. I'm submitting written comments. So I'll just do a real high level overview is that have concerns about the maps. And I actually worked with Kellen a little bit last week in trying to take the original maps in the site certificate and overlay the changes to determine exactly what was happening in an area. And I was unable to do that. And when I talked with Kellen about finding the road descriptions, we were unable to locate those. So, and then the ODOE map online does not have roads or anything on it. The reason I was asking Kellen is dealing with, I'm also kind of the Firewise coordinator in this area, and we're looking at evacuation routes to 244 in the Hillgard area. And working with emergency management, we were unable to really discern what roads Idaho Power was actually going to work on versus what we were trying to do for our emergency evacuation. So basically, my overall comments, and I'll provide details in the maps as I went through, is that the maps do not conform with the OAR where they're readable, have clear roads, streams, and such on them, because we were unable to do that. But that's coming in a written comment. My second comment is, I got to pop up a screen here, is the wildfire plan. The wildfire plan in RFA 1 is the 2022 wildfire plan. The 2023 wildfire plan has been approved by FSAC. And in that, certain conditions were enumerated from PUC to Idaho Power about their lack of correlating data between the state's analysis, the county's analysis, and Oregon Trail Electric Cooperative that all see the route in Morgan Lake as a wildland urban interface in a high risk area. And Idaho Power does not see that. That is the same for the Perry area and the Hillgard area. So essentially within that wildfire map that Idaho Power has submitted, it is inaccurate. And like I said, the PUC has put some conditions on it, and I will follow that up in writing. It's probably in your inbox now. So those are my two comments, and we would appreciate a contested case consideration on both the maps and the wildfire issue. Thank you.
Any questions of Mr. Kreider from council? Councilor Condon?
Thank you, but sorry, not of Mr. Kreider.
Oh, okay.
Question about the wildfire plans, just how they're updated every year. The OPUC will review those plans. Do those get incorporated? Or how do those get incorporated? The wildfire plans, as the OPUC reviews those annually. Yeah, well, whoever, anybody in the room.
Okay. Sorry, Councilman, could you reiterate the question, please?
Just a question about, as the OPUC reviews the wildfire plans annually, how do those, how are those incorporated in requirements of Idaho Power how do we recognize those plans?
So in the draft proposed order, we have a condition that contemplates the annual updates that basically says the most recent approved one annually would be submitted.
Submitted with, if I remember correctly, with OPUC's approval, that we'd
Correct,
have that as
correct.
part of our record every
Correct.
single year.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Other questions of Mr. Kreider? Okay. Nancy, are there any other people on the webinar or phone that indicate they wish to testify?
Vice Chair, there are no hands raised, but I will just let everybody know how to raise their hand. So if you're participating on the webinar, you're going to look at the bottom of the main window. There is a set of icons. Just click on the participant and that will raise your hand. And you're finished, you can just click it again and that will lower your hand. If you're participating by phone, press *3 on your telephone keypad to raise your hand and then *3 again on your telephone keypad to lower your hand. And we'll just go ahead and leave it open for a minute or two and see if anyone would like to participate.
Mr. Vice Chair.
Yeah.
Again, for the record, Todd Cornett, if I may, while we're waiting for this, just a procedural kind of clarification. There were a couple comments that requested a contested case. Not quite yet. We're not at that stage in the process. So the way this works is once the record closes, then council will review the draft proposed order, and then staff will take all of those comments from the public, from council, from the applicant, or in this case, the certificate holder, into consideration. We will create the proposed order, which is, again, looking at the findings and conditions and making any changes based on those comments. Then we will issue that proposed order. At that point, people can request a contested case on any issues they raised on the record. So I want to make sure everybody understands sort of the timing, the council understands the timing, that we're not there yet.
Ed?
Kellen Tardyweather for the record. I think we're still kind of waiting to see if anybody else raises their hand online. I just wanted to clarify that we did receive written comments from Stop B2H and Susan Gear, and those have been emailed and provided to council. And we also, I don't know if I said it last night, but the Oregon California Trails Association, OCTA, had provided comments previously, and those are have been provided to council as well, and all comments will be loaded to the comment docket that's on our webpage too.
Well, okay. And Nancy's indicating that no hands are raised on the webinar and no *9s, is it, on the phone? So with that, we'll go to based on the comments received tonight and on the record, does a certificate holder wish to respond to request to extend the record to respond? Okay.
So, Mr. Vice Chair, again, I'll be in procedural mode. Absolutely, the certificate holder can respond to any comments that were provided, last night, tonight, in written. You still have to take into consideration the request to extend the record. If the council does that, and I think it's appropriate to let Idaho Power respond, but if you do extend the record, you would also then want to, however much time, want to give them an opportunity to respond to anything that's submitted in the record. So just making sure we're all tracking on sort of the sequence of this.
We'll have that discussion before.
I think at this point it's still appropriate because they'll have the opportunity to respond to anything. If you extend the record, they will still have the opportunity to respond to anything beyond that. I think the one thing that we want to make sure, and sorry, Joe, to cut you off. One of the steps was council, if you had any comments yourselves, and this would then allow Idaho Power to respond to your comments. So I think that's an important part that we have not included yet. But I think you can stay there if you would like.
You're right. I missed that. Would it be important for him to hear any comments we have before he speaks? Okay, so council, I slipped up here. Are there any council members that would like to provide comments to the department or the certificate holder? Councilor Byer.
Sorry, I just got a comment. They can't hear you online.
Just yell at people,
Is the, I'm not sure the mic is working. I don't think it's you. This one.
So thank you, everybody. And we'll try not to make it too staticky. But my question for staff is if they can more clearly articulate the current requirements of both FSEC and Oregon Public Utilities Commission regarding what's expected of wildfire plans, how updated plans submitted by utilities to the Public Utility Commission are folded into the conditions that FSEC includes in our sites certificates, and just making that more apparent because there are two different wildfire mitigation plans, as I understand. And if there's only one, let's be explicit about that, but making sure that the public, that council members understand what's required for those wildfire mitigation plans and how the updates are treated. I said that 3 times, 5 different ways. I apologize, but I hope you get the gist of it. So thank you.
Council. Councilor
Vice
Condon.
Chair Howe, just to follow up on Councilmember Byers' comment, if I remember correctly, and we choose to adopt OPUCs, there is only one plan, and this calls for, it's called for in certainly this work, that it is updated annually. And I would guess it's the whole plan and the approval process, and they must abide. I mean, there's no way to get out of that, right? Okay, thank you. But I think incorporating really specific language is good. Thank you.
Comments from council to the department or the certificate holder? Okay. Mr. Stipple?
Vice Chair, Council. I just wanted to respond to a couple comments we heard. We do plan on providing some written comments. But in general, I just want to make sure that, council's aware we do have a fire prevention and suppression plan that is used during construction. We have specific procedures and rules and requirements that hopefully will prevent an outbreak. This is in addition to the OPUC jurisdictional wildfire mitigation plan. A nuance on the risk corridors, they do consider life and structures, as was previously heard during the original ASC proceedings. And again, that fire prevention plan is really for construction. On decommissioning, we have 2 points. Idaho Power is the operators, and we are responsible for the operation of the line, including compliance with the wildfire mitigation plan. So we will ultimately be responsible responsible for decommissioning. And in the previous proceedings, council found we could do both in compliance with the rules. I want to emphasize Mr. Williams is not affected by this amendment. We're not proposing any change on his property. And we are, of course, adhering to the cultural studies and the 106 process as we work through pre-construction compliance. I will say, we are, Ms. Gilbert is requesting to hold the record open in order to raise issues that were previously brought up in prior hearings. We are, from a schedule perspective, we are looking to break ground this fall. And, once we do that, we have 3 years to begin construction. So we would like an opportunity to respond to questions written, especially since a few came in tonight. And so we would request that we can respond till 10 a.m. tomorrow morning and provide those written responses to the council. Thank you.
Mr. Stipple, are there questions from the council of Mr. Stipple? I don't hear any. Oh, Councilor Byer.
For the record, Ann Byer, just thank you for the clarification on the wildfire mitigation plan and that there is a plan in place during construction in addition to the required wildfire plan approved by Oregon Public Utilities. That kind of clarification, I think, is very important and helps address some of the concerns we heard. So thank you. And just for the record, 10 a.m. tomorrow doesn't give you a lot of time or anybody else a lot of time, and respecting your schedule and your desire to get through. Is that enough time?
Appreciate that. Yes, it is enough time. I think, we're pretty well versed with the record and know these issues. And so we have a few of us who are going to work diligently tonight and respond.
Any other questions, comments? Okay, thank you, Mr. Stipple.
Thank you. I do have one more question just related, just because the financial assurance was brought up, and the financial assurance is really for, at the end of the project. But with related to construction and the lines during operation, certainly Idaho Power, I would expect, would have insurance and other financial means in place to, should anything happen, heaven forbid, but.
Yes, absolutely. Like any construction project, we prepare for the worst. So absolutely, we have all those in place during construction.
Hope for the best.
That's
Prepare
right.
for the worst.
That's right.
Thank you.
I had just a little bit of order here. I've, in my notes, I've got a request from Ms. Gilbert to leave the record open. Didn't stipulate any time frame. We had a request also from Mr. Kreider for a contested case, but I think Secretary Cornett took care of that for us so that we know this isn't the time for that. I don't have in my notes, and this is where I'm asking everybody else, did Mr. Kreider or Mr. Williams request the record to be left open? No. Okay, I didn't have it in my notes. So I just want to make sure. So, Councilor Condon.
Thank you. Other than they're going to submit the written, their notes and written transcript.
Correct.
So
Yeah. So we need to deal with the length of time to leave the record open if we want to leave the record open. Is that right?
Yeah, so for the record, Todd Cornett, yes, Vice Chair, I think there's sort of a series of questions that have to be asked and answered. The first one is Ms. Gilbert's request to leave the record open. Then I think the following ones will be based upon what your decision is on that. So I think before we get to the other ones, I think you just need to tackle that one first.
Counselor Devlin. Mike.
Wow.
Okay. I have practically swallowed the mic, but the applicant has requested to have till 10 a.m. tomorrow to respond to the comments that have been received by the public. I would assume then if we extend the deadline for the public, and specifically in this case, Ms. Gilbert, to comment, that we would open a period of time again for the applicant to comment on any additional comments that are received.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Mr. Chair, if we were to extend the deadline for the applicant to respond till 10 a.m. as requested to Ms. Gilbert to like noon tomorrow, and then give the applicant, even though I don't know if they'll ever get any sleep until say early tomorrow evening to respond, and then close it at some time and be limited to those comments.
So if I may,
Secretary
Vice Chair,
Cornett.
so the three things, I guess, since Councilmember Devlin brought up, the three questions, again, that would be taken is first, Ms. Gilbert's, to keep the record open for however long, couple hours, couple days, couple weeks, again, it's entirely your choice. Then there would absolutely need to be a period of time for the certificate holder to respond. We would certainly want to make sure that they felt they had adequate time, again, whatever that was. We have on the agenda for tomorrow, the council's review of the draft proposed order. So just Councilmember Devlin, with your proposal, that would eliminate that opportunity to have the council's review of the draft proposed order tomorrow. Not that that's a requirement. I think, we want to have, enough council and staff and certainly the certificate holder enough time to review. But again, I just want to make sure that you're tracking all of these items. So I think sort of on its merit, do you want to give Ms. Gilbert more time? Well, it wouldn't be just Ms. Gilbert, it would be anybody more time to respond. Because I don't think we would be able to hold the record open for just one person. I think it would need to be generally open for anybody. And then, whatever that time frame is, we wouldn't know what would come in until the end of that time frame.
Okay.
If I may weigh in here, what we haven't addressed yet is whether or not the standard that you apply when you receive a request such as this, and the standard is a good cause standard. And I'll refresh your recollection that you did receive a request a little over a year ago at the June 2022 meeting to extend the public comment deadline on the DPO in the Nolan Hills case. And in that instance, the Blue Mountain Alliance requested to extend the public comment deadline because he was unaware of the deadline or of the project. You found that that was not good cause, that the notice had been issued, the public was on notice of the deadline, and his being unaware of it was not good cause to extend it, so you denied that request. That is one example in recent history of similar requests. So what you need to assess is whether or not there is good cause to extend the deadline in this instance. If you believe there is, then you could extend it. If you don't think there's good cause, then you would reject it.
Councilor Rowe, want me to start this off? Okay. In my notes, I have that Ms. Gilbert was talking about the fire plan, the OPUC fire plan, and Mr. Stipple commented on that and clarified to me that I heard that it does include the OPUC standards as well as is in place for the construction issues that Ms. Gilbert was raising. She raised issues of the plan addressing safety of citizens, and Mr. Stipple addressed that as well, that it does include egress access during issues of fire safety. in those areas. The bond amounts don't address future changes, and I think that's been addressed from the standpoint of the bonds are looked at annually. And the vegetation management plan is finalized without ensuring noxious weeds. I'm not sure. And the management plan, well, we've seen the management plan and it's complete, dealing with noxious weeds as well. So she wants additional time to submit on issues that I think Mr. Stipple, yes.
Vice Chair, if I may, as I understood it, Ms. Gilbert was not clear on her ability to comment on changes to conditions. And so that was at least as I understood it, I can get a head nod if that was correct. So to respond to changes to conditions.
Okay. With that, then, where's the council on extending the record for her to be able to comment on changes to conditions?
So Vice Chair Howe, I understand that the council has this as an agenda decision item tomorrow. And give you the okay to go ahead with the draft proposed order. Proposed order.
So
Yes. thank
it
you.
would be your review and comments to staff in any direction on making changes between the draft proposed order and the proposed order.
Right. So, trying to determine if that's important from a timing perspective. It's certainly important for the applicant. It's presumably important for staff to queue this up in terms of their other projects. May I ask a question of Ms. Gilbert?
So, Ms. Gilbert,
If we gave you until later this evening to raise your issue on the one condition, and you could get that to us by 10 p.m. this evening so that the applicant could review it by 10 a.m. tomorrow, perhaps we can keep this all moving. Is that possible? I know you have to get home.
Right. I'm an hour's drive from home. It would really be helpful. And you're right. I'm only asking to comment on the one issue of the vegetation management plan. That's the only one. I've already submitted comments on the other issues that were commented on. And it was only because the announcement did not indicate that I was able to comment broadly on these site certificate changes, if you look at it. But it would, with getting home, and I'm thinking if you could give me till tomorrow morning, even like 10 or 11, I could do that. I don't know how I could do it by 10 o'clock tonight. I just don't.
I will leave this to others. I'm just trying to come up with a happy place for
Thank you.
everybody, but also recognizing that it's one condition and also recognizing that the applicant has asked for a time certain to review.
Councilor Devlin?
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. If I could clarify and get a clarification. Let's say we gave Ms. Gilbert till 10 a.m. tomorrow morning, and the applicant is already going to respond to the other comments by 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. And we gave him some additional time should there be a reason to comment on Ms. Gilbert's comment. Since we are reviewing simply the proposed order, we are not making a decision on it. I would assume, and maybe there is or isn't anything within the testimony we received and all the written testimony that we received of when we can make a determination if there's anything substantive there that might delay an action or cause us to make something different than the proposed order that's being a decision on the proposed order. There isn't really any interference in the decision making there. I mean, if we get all of those comments by sometime tomorrow, we go over the proposed order based on the information that we had when the proposed order was prepared. And then staff reviews the comments to see if there's any reason to recommend anything other than proposed order. Is there any conflict in that whole process that is going to cause any sort of significant delay in the council's ultimate decision? Because the council's decision on amendment number 1 isn't going to be made tomorrow.
Correct. So Councilmember Devlin, the question is really how much information has been submitted on the record by the public, by the certificate holder and their response. Do you have adequate time to review that by tomorrow? Are you going to be seeking any input from staff based on our evaluation? And therefore, do we have enough time to evaluate that information to provide any sort of thoughts or ideas to you? That's the, you know, if we can continue to have the review of the draft proposed order on the agenda tomorrow, the answer to both those questions has to be yes. And so the longer you extend the time frame, the more information is put in the record that is, you know, harder to review within that time frame. That makes it difficult for council to adequately review the information, provide direction to us to make changes in the proposed order. That doesn't mean that that shouldn't be the right choice. I'm just telling you the reality of it.
Okay.
So you're not obligated to have the review of the DPO tomorrow. That could be done at a future date. But if you're interested in keeping that on the agenda, then you just need to be thinking about timing, you know, how, you know, what's fair to, you know, Ms. Gilbert, anybody else to be able to respond, what's fair to the certificate holder and being able to review and respond, what's fair to staff to be able to review and provide, you know, responses to you, and what's fair to you to be able to legitimately review all of that information. That's kind of what we're getting at.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, Ms. Vice Chair, I would say it would depend upon whether staff felt there is a benefit for the council to review the proposed order tomorrow. But on the other side of this, in terms of extending the deadlines, the council has heard all the testimony that's provided orally. I doubt if all of us have read the written testimony that has come in, since some of it has come in during this meeting and some of it is a little bit more lengthy than the oral testimony. So I think if the council is potentially going to bring up issues, they should have adequate time to at least read the written testimony. And I don't think any of us are planning to read it tonight, to be quite honest.
So that raises the question, kind of this other information aside, whether to remain, you know, to have the record remain open, do you feel that you have adequate time by tomorrow during that agenda item to review the written material?
I can only speak for one person, one member, probably not. Because we're going to be going through the other agenda items before that. And unless I'm planning to get up earlier than the 6:45 a.m. tomorrow, I'm planning to get up at, I don't think I'm going to have time to read it actually in detail.
Councilman Meyer.
Thank you, Vice Chair Howe. Just looking at our emails, we have received 2 additional comments, the B2H and Ms. Greer's. And then Ms. Gilbert's, we've had the Trails Association comments for another day, for about a day. And I haven't looked at it with much focus. Staff, how are you feeling?
For the record, Kellen Tardyweather, I'm feeling great. Thank you for asking. So I'm just to outline, because we've kind of heard a lot, we've heard several comments in the table of contents for Stop B2H's comments. I'm just gonna go through, they organized it very well. Good job, guys. Thank you. It's 17 pages. So they raise issues of access roads and piecemeal review, issues of maps, creating an inability to review the RFA with specific specificity, changes to wildfire plan, non-compliant, reevaluation of the required bond as necessary, conformance with Oregon's Forest Practices Act, changes to helicopter use requirements, removal fill requirements, significant changes in the requirements regarding the blasting plan and landowner notification. And that's in the main body. And then they have 2 attachments that are supportive of the Forest Practices Act item. And then Susan Gear's comment is focused around the Rice Glass Hill area that is a protected area now under council's rules. We're prepared and comfortable to continue with the review of the DPO tomorrow. We could give Ms. Gilbert until 10 a.m. and then maybe Idaho Power until 11 a.m. That does not, again, and so what we would do, I have slides prepared, right? And my staff report prepared that council had, that is pretty lengthy. It is contemplating council's review of the draft proposed order. And then what we would really try to do is focus in, I would kind of pivot the presentation to focus more to be responsive to comments raised and what the applicant responses, understanding that we wouldn't have like draft language ready in the proposed order to look at, but we would be kind of unpacking those issues a little bit more. But we are comfortable with being able to do that tomorrow.
So if I can throw out an option, which would be pretty much exactly what Kellen just said. And then we could start on the review of the draft proposed order tomorrow, and maybe we could conclude with it. But if you then felt maybe there's not enough time, the day's going long, you didn't have an adequate time, we could get through probably most of it tomorrow. And then we could postpone the rest either to the next council meeting in August, or because there might be sort of smaller remaining items, we could set up a virtual meeting prior to the next council meeting where we could then finalize the remainder of those items if we aren't able to get through it all tomorrow.
London?
Thank you. At the risk of offending Ms. Gilbert, and with all due respect, I'm there. You've been probably involved in this process certainly a whole lot longer than I have, but it strikes me that that you didn't know that you could comment on it, and it was a DPO. It was a draft proposed order that always allows comments for anything contained in it, and so I'm a little bit concerned that you didn't know and what we could have done to mitigate that. And given Councilor Rowe's comment, does that open it up? If we allow this, does it open up to everybody or anybody who says, I didn't know I could make comments? So, and I don't mean any disrespect, because I certainly appreciate your engagement, full engagement in this.
I think
I would actually. Now my mic is out. Can you hear me? No, it is. I think it's fair, because what you're trying to get at is, is there a good cause for her requesting the extension? That's what you need to put on the record. If you think there is good cause, and Councilmember Condon is spot on, because this is beyond just this request. This has impacts on such requests in the future. So people will look back at this meeting and say they granted it for Ms. Gilbert. What is the good cause? She's alleging that the notice in some way was deficient. What you ought to do is look at the notice and figure out, do you decide that it was deficient in some way? Should she have known that she had the ability to comment on changes in conditions? If you don't agree, then you should reject it. If you agree, not only are you allowing her to extend the comment, then you essentially are instructing staff to make revisions in future notices.
Yeah. There's a suggestion there. Is that an easy thing to pull up and let us take a look at the notice that was sent?
We can certainly bring the notice up. The legal requirement in the rule does not talk about that. I mean, I think Kellen brought up the rule language. We can certainly bring up the rule language. It talks about what needs to go to the notice, but that's specific. It doesn't talk about specifically in an amendment, the idea that somebody can comment on conditions. That is not in the rule.
Yeah. Okay.
So again, you can take a look at the rule language. You can take a look at the notice. None of it's going to contain that information, and it's not legally required to contain that information.
Okay. So it's basically what you're saying. It's past practice. It's
Well, I mean, we follow the requirements. Well, we go well beyond the requirements of what has to be in the notice to try to provide enough information.
Right.
But that's just, I mean, yeah, that's just not that's not required, and we've not put that in there.
Yeah.
And there's a whole host of things in an application or an amendment that it would be an impossible list to try to describe what people can comment on. And I think that as we talked about, everything in the DPO, the draft proposed order, is available to comment on.
So I have the notice up here on my screen. And I guess it is kind of inherent that if it's a comment period on the draft proposed order, that you could comment on anything in the draft proposed order. But here we kind of specifically, we talk about the transmission line, roads, and then modifications of site certificate, site conditions.
But it says in there,
On page 2.
additional land.
Okay. Is this what you're thinking? This. Bless you.
Vice Chair Howe, thank you. I think this is pretty specific, what it includes, what RFA 1 includes, and then how to raise an issue. But it is of the whole RFA 1 amendment request and the draft proposed order. It doesn't limit it it doesn't talk about any limitation in here to anything.
right. It's general, not
It's
limited.
general, right? Free to talk about anything.
Yeah.
If I could point your attention to the last sentence under the subheading description of amendment requests, it says RFA 1 also seeks approval to modify condition language for several conditions.
Council Rowe, you said from the legal standpoint of what we're doing is looking at what's the wording again?
Standard is good cause. So do you think
good
there's
cause.
good cause to extend the deadline?
Yeah.
Vice Chair Howe.
Councilor Byer?
At the risk of being kind of ornery, based on what we have just gone over and based on what we know, I would suggest that we find that there's not good cause to keep the record open. And again, no disrespect to any of the people who provided comments, but just understanding that we set precedent with every action we take. And this probably doesn't rise to the good cause test, or doesn't meet the good cause test. So having said that, I would suggest that we close the public comment period as originally stated in the written materials. I think it was at the close of this hearing, and allow the applicant to respond by 10 a.m. tomorrow. Based on comments from staff, it suggests to me that they can at least tee up the key issues for us tomorrow, and we could then review the draft and make recommendations to staff regarding anything where we thought they needed to do a little more digging. And again, thanks to Ms. Gilbert for raising these issues. And it's another one of those, Tom, I'm looking at you, where thinking more about our processes and clarity and what information we provide to the applicant and the public, it's something we need to think about. So that would be my recommendation. I don't know if we need a motion or what you would like.
I'll defer to Mr. Rowe. I think you could make a motion and vote on it. I don't think it's required. It may be good for the record because there's been a lot of conversation, and I do have draft motion language if you would like me to read it.
Any comment there, Council Rowe?
I think it's a good idea, just because in future, if we get these requests, it's nice to be able to look back at what the council has done in the past and the rationale provided for accepting or rejecting such a request.
Secretary Cornett, could you please? Okay. Okay. Secretary Cornett, we're ready.
My possible motion language, if anybody would like to make a motion after I read this. Mr. Vice Chair, I move the council find Ms. Gilbert has not met the good cause test to justify the public record remain open in the sorry, duplication. On the draft proposed order for, oh, sorry. All right, that could be a little duplication in here, but has not met the good cause test to justify the record remain open in the public record of the draft proposed order for the Boardman Hemingway request for Amendment 1 because we do not find that, or we do find the notice was sufficient to make the public aware of their right to comment on changes to conditions in the draft proposed order.
Any council member want to say so moved?
So moved.
Any discussion? Oh, wait, we need a second.
Chair Howe, I'll second. This is Counselor Byer.
Okay, we've had a motion and a second. Any discussion?
Apologies. So Cindy Condon made the motion. I don't think I identified myself. So for the record.
Good. Well, we've had a motion and a second. It doesn't appear any discussion. So could you please call the
Ann Byer. Cindy Condon. Richard Devlin.
Yes.
Ken Howe.
Yes.
Jordan Truitt.
Yes.
Motion carries, Mr. Vice Chair.
Okay. Are there any other comments from council
Sorry, can you?
Do we need a motion to give the applicant till 10 a.m. tomorrow to respond to all public comments received, oral or written?
I always like to do things by motion. I love motion.
Okay.
So,
Want to move that?
so what I would recommend is moving that the public comment period is closed as of now, but that the record remain open for the express purpose of allowing Idaho Power to respond to comments.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I move that the public record be closed now and that the applicant be given till 10 a.m. tomorrow to respond to all comments received, whether oral or written.
Thank you, Councilor Devlin. Do we have a second?
Condon, second.
Okay.
Sorry. Second.
So we've had a motion and a second. Secretary Cornett, can you call the row?
Ann Byer,
Yes.
Cindy Condon,
Yes.
Richard Devlin,
Yes.
Ken Howe,
Yes.
Jordan Truitt.
Yes.
Motion carries, Mr. Vice Chair.
Okay. So I believe we're at the conclusion of the hearing tonight. So it is now 7:24 on July 18th, 2023. The public hearing on the draft proposed order for the Boardman Hemingway transmission line request for Amendment 1 is now closed. And it's now 7:25 on July 18th, 2023. The public hearing on the draft proposed order for the Boardman to Hemingway transmission line request for amendment now is now closed for public comment. However, I'm sorry. The July 17th, I better start over. The time is now 7:25 and the July 17th through 19th, 2023 meeting of the Energy Facility Siting Council is now recessed until tomorrow morning at 8:30 a.m. Thank you.